Let's make sure people can see her on YouTube.
No, that was orange. No, it was orange.
It's very hard. There's some weird and language of the
Madam Mayor, it is 6:06 and we are live.
Thank you very much. Calm down, kid. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Lake Worth Beach Special City Commission meeting regarding the housing study and short-term rentals, Monday, September 23rd, 2024. Roll call, please.
Mayor Betty Resch,
Here.
Vice Mayor Sarah Maliga,
Present.
Commissioner Christopher McVoy.
Here,
Is your mic on, Commissioner McVoy?
it is, and I talked into it, spoke into it too.
That's really weird. It sounds very like you're in a tunnel. Commissioner Mimi May,
Here.
Commissioner Reynaldo Diaz.
Here.
Commissioner May, will lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, is this any better? I switched mics.
Yes.
It still sounds very woofy.
That's the voice.
I won't take that personally.
No, it's not just you, actually. I don't know.
How's
I'm
mine?
gonna guess it's me. Let's go with that.
We'll take that. We'll take that. So, unfinished business, just discussion and update on the vacation and short-term rentals as well. And that says A, but the first thing I believe we're addressing is the housing study
That's correct.
from FAU.
That is correct.
Are they here?
He is. back.
They are here. He is here.
He is here.
Okay, so I think, the agenda's a little sketchy. I think what we're gonna have is this gentleman give his presentation on the housing study in general, and then open up for questions. And then after that is finished, going to the short-term rental, discussion. Does that make sense to everybody?
Madam Mayor, opening up to questions on the dais for the gentleman, just so the public knows it's not. Them
Right,
asking
right,
questions.
right. They never get. Okay, so just give us your name and your occupation and take it away.
So I have the presentation, should I just, somebody else do this?
Oh, you actually have a remote right there.
And you have to, you're tall, you have to be very close to the mic. We need a mic. Put that on
Everybody here. Yeah. I'm Phil Gillen, I'm FAU.
the- Start over again. You have to really talk loud.
I am Phil Gillen. I am an associate professor of sociology at FAU and the associate chair of the sociology department. So I'm here to present the Lake Worth Beach housing study. It was a very comprehensive study with a lot of different data points. So I'm not gonna be able to present the study in its entirety. What I'll do is try to focus on the highlights from it, as well as some of the kind of handful of recommendations that we tried to provide.
Could you repeat your last name? Because I couldn't understand what you said.
We can't hear him at all.
Yeah, we
can't.
Could be-
No, You really have to
Use
be
the
loud.
mobile mic that the attorney
It's
is.
the same, I think.
The mics, it's the mics themselves. He's got to talk directly into it, unfortunately.
Voice sensitive.
Yes, sorry.
There you go.
Punch down for it. Is that better?
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. So I just start over. So I am Phil Lewin. I'm from FAU and
Phil Lewin,
Phil Lewin,
LU.
LEWIN.
Okay.
I'm in the sociology department at FAU. I'm here to present the Lake Worth Beach Emergency Housing Study and Policy Response Analysis. It was a very comprehensive study. There was a ton of different data points that were collected. So as I said, I'm not going to be able to present the study in its entirety. I'll try to focus on basically the key takeaways from it in the time that I have available. So a little bit of background on the study, for those of you who might not be familiar with it. This study was conducted from June 2023 until March 2024. It involved, like I said, several different data collection strategies. I'm happy to answer questions about those if anybody has them. 3 reports were ultimately produced from the study. What the first report did is it provided a social and economic profile of the city. The primary focus of that first report, though, was to basically analyze the extent of housing distress in the city, the extent of housing unaffordability, as well as some of the underlying factors that were causing that unaffordability and what kind of impacts it was having on residents across the city. The second report that we submitted was basically an analysis of the impacts that recent legislation by the Florida legislature is likely to have on local housing conditions. So in the special sessions in 2022 and in 2023, there were a number of important bills passed, including the Local Act and the Residential Tenancies Act. There's kind of compliance guidelines and an analysis of those in that second report. Report number 3 offered recommendations based on our findings on some measures that you all could consider, which we believe might positively impact housing affordability and housing security in the city. So I'll just start by providing kind of, I think, what are some of the key upshots of the housing situation in Lake Worth Beach. The first big finding, I would say, is probably not going to be a surprise to anybody who is in this room. We found that housing costs have increased dramatically and that they have become fundamentally detached from the ability of many residents in Lake Worth Beach to pay them. So one of the first markers of that are basically home prices. Home prices have soared since 2019. And to give you a sense of kind of the level of stress, we found that less than 10% of renter households earned enough money to qualify for a median unit that was for sale in the city. We've also found that the homeownership rate, due to these increasing costs, as well as some of the legacy impacts of the subprime mortgage crisis from 2007 and 2008, have caused a declining rate of homeownership in the city of Lake Worth Beach. So since 2008, the homeownership rate has dropped by about 10 percentage points. The current rate is far below the county, national, and state averages for homeownership. To give you a sense of what that means concretely, Lake Worth Beach, especially in the last 5 years, has experienced tremendous population growth. Even though relative to 2008, we have more than 2,000 new households in the city, there are 143 fewer homeowner households than there were in 2008. So what this has done is it's basically forced most residents, the city is a majority renter, to rely on rental markets. And we found that over 60% of renter households are cost burdened. That means that they devote more than 30% of their earnings to their housing costs, which research has shown time and again sets people up for kind of financial insecurity over the long haul. It's not a sustainable thing to do. To give you a sense of what that means kind of practically, to be able to comfortably afford their homes, if you're a renter, you would need to earn on average about $20,000 more than you're earning today to kind of get out of that level of cost burden. So all of these increased home prices and rents are contributing to basically a process of displacement and gentrification. One thing that we found in the study is that a lot of low and moderate income households have been forced to relocate because they can no longer afford to live here. That's changing kind of the nature of the city in many ways. We found that these abrupt cost increases are causing multiple forms of stress. So one thing obviously are the relocations. So a lot of people who have lived here, we found out for many years, who basically had to go because they couldn't stay. There were a number of people who received cost increases that they couldn't afford, which have resulted in evictions. We found that a lot of people are adapting to increased home costs by basically doubling up. So there's an increasing problem of having overcrowded units in the city. And it's causing people to basically make unfortunate choices. Sometimes people have to escalate relationships quickly to move in with somebody so that they can basically afford a place to live. They can't do it on their own. Sometimes people have to stay in undesirable or even abusive relationships because they must choose between that or they must choose between having a place to live. Maybe most of all, we found that a lot of people were having to make difficult choices. In order to cover these increased costs, there are a lot of renters who are having to basically trade off on things like medical care, food, etc. A lot of people are under a considerable amount of psychological stress, which sometimes translates into things like depression. One thing this has done too is it makes residents vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. If people are desperate for a place to live, it gives them, this is of course not all landlords, but in that, those cases where there might be an unscrupulous landlord, it can give them leverage over the tenant that results in unfair treatment to them. We also found that, the county and the state's main approach to basically addressing this issue has been to try to stimulate increased production. We found that there is, that's certainly happening, but there are also a lot of challenges with making that work. Building costs are very, very high. There are things like land scarcities. there are, it's not easy to approve large-scale affordable housing developments. All of that is slowing the process down. Another big barrier that the city has, as well as particularly Lake Worth Beach, is that most of the workforce housing units that are getting created through acts like the Live Local Act are pegged to the county's area median income standards, which are significantly higher than Lake Worth beaches. Residents in Lake Worth Beach make about 40% less on average than residents across the county. So some of these units that are supposed to be earmarked as affordable housing, really many residents don't even qualify for them. One last thing that we found is that there are some housing inequalities in the city. So there are a lot of disparities between, for example, homeowners and renters. Homeowners in many cases make twice as much as renters. So those who are experiencing some of the most kind of steep increases are least likely to be able to adapt to them in many cases. We also found some disparities by social groups. So one kind of big thing that we found since the subprime mortgage crisis is that there's been a fairly stark decrease in the level of homeownership by Black households. So that rate of homeownership has decreased by about more than 50% since 2008. And today fewer than 20% of Black households in the city own their own homes because they were kind of disproportionately targeted for some of the predatory lending that happened during 2008. So that's a basic kind of upshot of some of the key findings. What I'll do now is just try to talk about the extent to which housing costs across Lake Worth Beach have increased over the last 5 years or so. And to do that, I'd like to try to contextualize them by talking about the historical norms. So if we look at the decade preceding 2020, right, from 2010 to 2020, what we basically found is that rents in Lake Worth Beach were much lower than the national, state, and local levels. It was much cheaper to live here for the most part than to live across the county, the state, and in other areas of the nation. The other thing that we found is that the level of the level of rent increases people were experiencing were happening gradually and were usually pretty manageable. So between 2010 and 2020, the average rent only increased by about $23.60 per year. If you look at the whole period from 2010 until 2020, rents started at $957 and they ended at about $1,193, right? So over 10 years, you really didn't have a tremendous amount of growth, of increase in the rates people were renting their apartments or houses from. What this was basically enabled by was the aftermath of the subprime mortgage crisis. So as I'm sure many of you know, Lake Worth Beach was hit especially hard by that crisis. At the peak of that crisis, there were, I think, almost 2,000 vacant, foreclosed, or abandoned homes. And a lot of those homes were basically selling for very low prices, sometimes $25,000, $30,000. And what happened is a lot of residents who were living here had a difficult time capitalizing upon those low prices because a lot of the banks were not giving loans at that time to ordinary consumers because they were spooked by kind of the 2008 crisis. And a lot of those units were basically acquired usually by landlords who did not occupy them and instead turn them into kind of long-term rentals. So that was, and because these units were oftentimes acquired at fairly low rates, the rents on them remained fairly steady over a 10-year period. During that period of time, though, it wasn't certainly like a rental utopia for a lot of people. Rents were low, but nonetheless, people in the city were very negatively affected by the subprime crisis and still had trouble affording these rents. So rents rose about 8.5%, for example, from 2010 to 2017, but the median household income in the city actually declined during that period. So people had low rents, but they were still falling behind on their rents. From 2010 to 2014, 1 in 14 households in the city who were renting faced an eviction notice. By 2017, 2/3 of renter households were cost burdened. 40% of them were severely cost burdened, meaning they were devoting more than half of their income to their housing costs alone. A big problem during this time as well was basically quality. Some people were renting units that were relatively low cost, but they might have had quality issues, right? That made the housing, unsafe for them or just not in a proper condition for them. So during this time, what I would say is a lot of people were kind of living in what you could consider a state of emergency. The primary problem for people was income. If people had an unexpected medical expense, if their car broke down, that could set them over the edge and jeopardize their housing security. what has happened since 2019, there's been really more of a bona fide housing emergency. And what I mean by that is the problem is not just people are not earning enough money anymore. The problem is that, but combined with the fact that housing costs have increased abruptly and exorbitantly. So some of the figures that we collected on this is we calculated the home affordability index for Lake Worth Beach. And we calculated that number at about 43. What that figure indicates is that most households in the city only earn 43% of the income that would be required to qualify for a loan on a median value unit that is for sale. We also found that rents had basically soared during this period. So between January 2020 and June 2023, the rent increased from about $1,193 a month to $826 per month. That's a 53% increase in 2.5 years. That's an annual rent hike of about 13%, which was 6 times the rent increase people were accustomed to receiving, during the preceding decade. And if you want to know what that means in terms of practical terms, a lot of households that are renting are paying more than $7,500 more per year on their housing expenses, because rental households tend to earn less than owner households. That in many cases constitutes about 1/5 of their income. So if you have to devote an extra 1/5 of your income to your housing costs, obviously that is unsustainable, and it pushes people beyond the edge of sustainability in many cases. So that's all indicated by multiple forms of distress. One thing that we did in the study is we looked at emergency rental assistance data. We found that 1 in 7 renter households in Lake Worth Beach between 2020 and 2022 have received emergency rental assistance. If that money had not been available due to one-time funding through the CARES Act and through ARPA, it's possible that 1 in 7 households that were renting could have been evicted, right? Because they had fallen behind on their rent. We found that there's a 15% rate of overcrowding, as I said, because people are basically having to do that to cope with the high prices that they're experiencing. We also analyzed 211 data. What those data showed was that residents in Lake Worth Beach were calling for housing assistance at about twice the rate of the city. You get a sense of that here in this. I think unfortunately some of the color codes are cut off. But what this graph does is it allows you to kind of visualize some of the trends that I mentioned. Lake Worth Beach is the blue line. The graph shows basically home values as calculated by Zillow from 2020 until 2023. And what you see for most of the past 25 years is that home prices in Lake Worth Beach were considerably below the county, state, and county norms. That started to change around 2018, 2019. And what's happened, recently by June 2023, when we were submitting our first report, is that home prices have basically started to reach parity with county prices. That's a problem, as I said, because incomes in Lake Worth Beach are considerably lower than the counties, which is why so few people qualify for loans on properties, and so few people have the wealth that is needed to acquire these properties. So to kind of put a human face on this, we collected testimonies from a lot of people who have been affected by the housing crisis. These ones are actually not from these interviews. These are basically statements that people had made at the meeting you all had in August 2022, I think it was, when when a housing emergency resolution was declared. And we analyzed a lot of those records, and these were kind of a handful of the things people said at that time. I've lived in Lake Worth Beach for over 15 years. My rent was $800 a month. I've now raised it to $1,200. I have 3 children. It's becoming impossible for me to pay this amount. I work 2 jobs, and even then, it's not enough. I don't know where we'll go if we can't afford to stay here. Another resident said, I've been a resident here for 10 years. The situation with rents is unbearable. They increased my rent by $400. I have elderly parents who live with me, and I'm the sole breadwinner. We're facing the possibility of being homeless. This is an emergency for families like mine. This is a handful of commentaries, but there are many stories like this across the city of people who can just not cope with the cost of housing today. One last thing I'll highlight is we interviewed a number of people who work in assisted services, social workers. One overarching theme that we got from those interviews is simply that people are receiving far many requests for assistance than they have resources to handle, right? There is a great demand, there's limited resources that are basically not up to the task. So a couple of examples of this, I think there's 5 or 6, I can't remember off the top of my head, public housing authorities in Palm Beach County that distribute housing choice vouchers. All of their waiting lists are closed. Sometimes those waiting lists have thousands of people. So even people who qualify for federal housing assistance are not able to get it, and likely will not have a chance at getting it for several years to come because those waiting lists have grown so long. There is an increasing number of unsheltered people across the county. The point in time count has shown an increased number of people experiencing homelessness over the past 3 years. That figure today is over 2,100 people. The problem is that the county does not have the resources to basically assist everybody who doesn't have a place to live. There are beds available for just 10 to 15% of people who are experiencing homelessness. That emergency rental assistance program I mentioned that had kept many people in their homes during the kind of worst of the pandemic is basically exhausted of funding. And there is, affordable housing and workforce housing units that are being built, but the utilization on all of those is basically almost complete. There's just not a lot of spots available for people. One disturbing trend that we found in these interviews is that a lot of social workers themselves are fatigued, are experiencing a sense of burnout because they're dealing with a lot of people who need help and they don't have the resources to help them. And they themselves are struggling with their housing costs and oftentimes having to relocate out of Palm Beach County as well. So now I'll kind of change gears and just talk about some of the underlying factors that are causing this. One of the first factors is basically an explosion in population growth since COVID-19. So if you look at historical population growth trends in Lake Worth Beach from 2010 until about 2020, the population growth here was pretty manageable. I was about 344 persons increase year over year. What happened between 2020 and 2021 alone is that the city added more than 4,200 people in a single year. That's an 11% population increase in a single year. That level of growth is 1.5 times the population growth that the city experienced in the prior 19 years combined, right? Obviously, that level of growth places an extreme amount of stress on the housing system. Another thing that kind of puts stress on the housing system is basically the profile of a lot of incoming residents. So Lake Worth Beach had a lot of lower income renter households who were basically paying low rents and having trouble maintaining those rents. A lot of the residents who have moved into the city have considerably more purchasing power. So nearly half of the new households that moved to Lake Worth Beach between 2020 and 2021 earn about twice the median income of the city in 2019. About nearly half of them earn at least $100,000 a year. So obviously what that does is it kind of starts gentrification dynamics. A lot of these new renters have more ability to compete for a scarce resource, which is housing. A lot of the people renting that housing basically can become more selective in their screening requirements. They can increase the income requirements, the credit scores. They can increase the cost of the rent. And that's basically what has happened. So we've seen kind of a loss of lower and moderate income households and an increase in more affluent households, which is, resulting in some higher rents. A second trend related to this is there's been a lot of speculation that we found on multifamily properties in Lake Worth Beach. Basically what happened during the pandemic is a lot of people lost their job. There was a huge unemployment rate. When people lost their jobs, they lost the ability to pay their rents. There was a national eviction moratorium for a period of time. So what this meant was for a lot of landlords, they were not taking an income for sometimes several months at a time. And a lot of these landlords in Lake Worth Beach were kind of your smaller mom and pop varieties, right? Who maybe operated a duplex or a quadplex, if that's the name of that. Small apartment units for very relatively low rates. They do not have the wealth or the capital to kind of withstand that stress. So a lot of them basically placed their multifamily apartments for sale. In the year 2021, especially, there was huge basically turnover in properties between March and August of 2021. 75 multifamily properties sold compared to 32 in the corresponding period the year before. The median sales price of those multifamily properties more than doubled, from $300,000 to $715,000. As I said before, you had properties that were acquired very cheaply, that could be rented cheaply. Now you have properties that were acquired for very high prices. The rents go up. At the same time that this is happening, of course, you have an influx of residents with a lot more purchasing power. So what happened is a lot of these units are getting basically rehabilitated and converted to suit a different demographic, right? So a lot of people who were living in homes for long periods of time received lease non-renewals. We talked to some people who basically qualified for emergency rental assistance when they fell behind on their rent. But the property owner did not accept it because there was kind of a goal of basically rehabilitating the unit and converting it into a higher economic value. So that has basically made housing a lot more competitive. Like I said, it can be $10,000 sometimes to move into an apartment when you include first, last security, application fees, pet deposits, if you have a pet. And you're able to require high income requirements and high credit requirements, which is making housing very unattainable for a lot of people who are living here. A third thing that we found was having an effect on housing prices were basically vacancies. So the county and state in their approach to housing have focused a lot on increasing production. One surprising finding that we had as we were doing the housing study is we found that even at the kind of height of this crisis, there was a substantial level of vacancy across the city. So in 2022, the latest data we had available for us, we found that there were almost 2,300 vacant units in Lake Worth Beach. That's over 13% of the total housing stock. That number, just to put that in context, that number of vacancies surpasses the total number of new housing units that were produced in the city from 2010 until 2023 combined. About half of those units are being used for seasonal homeowners or for short-term vacation rentals. We did some specific analysis on short-term vacation rentals. The most accurate figure we were able to produce was basically about 559 units. That could be more than that possibly. The way that we collected that figure is we collected public records from the people who pay the tourist development tax, which vacation rental owners are required to pay. Most of those properties have been purchased since 2020. 97% of them are basically entire units. And the way that this can increase housing costs is that basically you have you have a high demand for a limited supply of products, right? So that's taking a substantial number of products off of the market that are available for people who are renting or may wish to rent.
How many total housing units are there?
It's about 17,500, more or less.
Going road.
Some other factors.
Sure. I want to know something. Yeah.
Give her, I think between 17,000 and 17,500. I can give you the specific figure. I don't know off the top of my head. Some of the aggravating causes, and this first aggravating cause, actually these first two, I would say, have become more severe, much more severe since we submitted the original report. So one big factor is rising insurance costs. Florida pays the highest insurance premiums in the nation. Palm Beach County has the highest premiums in the state. Lake Worth Beach probably has some of the highest premiums in the county because we have older housing stock and we're very close to the water, and a lot of the big insurance companies won't even insure properties here. You're oftentimes reliant upon citizens to get insurance. So Floridians are already paying 4 times the national average. If you live in Lake Worth Beach, that figure is probably a little bit more severe. So this has kind of several different effects. It has effects specifically on basically lower income homeowners or homeowners who may be on a fixed income, for example, senior citizens, who thought that their housing costs were relatively fixed, but now every year they're getting, $5,000, $2,000 insurance hike, right? Which can push them over the edge. This also makes it more difficult to basically develop affordable housing, because when you develop affordable housing, you have to basically limit the rate of rental increases. But if you can't limit the rate of insurance increases, it can be difficult to make the numbers work on those types of projects. Kind of a related figure is SB 4D, which was passed after the collapse in Surfside. So basically what this piece of legislation does is it requires condominiums to undergo these milestone inspections I can't remember if it's 25 or 30 years. And basically if 30, okay. And if it's deficiencies are found, they are required to repair them. They also have to maintain reserves that are adequate for doing these repairs. And what this is doing, obviously, is this is subjecting a lot of people who are either renting condo units or living in condo units to very high special assessments or HOA fee increases to basically comply with the requirements of that piece of legislation. The state, I think, is trying to work to fix on that, but we don't know exactly what they'll do. Third thing that we found is that it can be hard and expensive to basically develop affordable housing units. The best kind of potential for affordable housing is usually in multifamily units, and across the country, across the state, across the county, there's a limited ability to do that for a variety of reasons. In a place like South Florida, there's not a ton of land available anymore. I don't know what the time period would be, but at some point we will hit build out, and most of the development possibility will be basically redevelopment more than infill projects. There is, land development regulations and zoning basically restrict the ability to develop up new housing projects. Oftentimes there's a lot of opposition to affordable housing projects or multifamily housing projects. And obviously the cost of just building housing units has gotten very expensive. Interest rates remain high, even though they just got cut. Building materials are expensive. And what we found is that even from some people who are trying to develop affordable housing through nonprofits, for a modest townhouse or single family home, you're looking at development costs that can be $400,000 or more, right? So unless you receive a tremendous amount of subsidy, it's sort of unaffordable almost by default. So it's just a lot of money to basically produce solution through new housing production for this particular issue. So what we did in the final report is we tried to provide kind of a menu of options that could be considered for improving housing security. We divided these up into basically 4 basic categories. So what most housing experts agree is that to create a stable, secure, and affordable housing ecosystem, you need 4 interrelated types of action. The first one is basically what we call protection. So this is protecting people against unfair, exploitative, or hostile housing market conditions. One limitation that Lakewood Beach has, as well as really all of the local governments across Florida, is the state has passed legislation that kind of drastically limits what can be done on this particular front. So for example, the Residential Tenancies Act prevents local governments from regulating the relationship between landlords and tenants. Nonetheless, we did try to provide some options that we think could provide people with protection. One, for example, would be an ordinance that protects people against source of income discrimination. So one thing that we found in the study, as I mentioned, is that some residents who received eviction notices because they couldn't pay qualified for emergency rental assistance, but were not allowed to use them, or the landlord would not accept them because it is legal unless an ordinance specifies otherwise to discriminate against people based on their wealth and source of income. That can also apply to people who receive a housing choice voucher, for example. It could even be, applied to somebody who maybe wants to pay their rent through a combination of alimony or child support, even though the legal status of doing that is a little bit more ambiguous. It might. It's also important to preserve existing affordable housing to protect residents against displacement.
That's why. You might have said it right.
Can't hear you.
Source of income, yeah. These are measured, so these are, things you could do, right, which are up to you. As I said, vacancies are increasing, housing costs across the city. One mechanism would be the thing before you tonight. You could incorporate a no net loss objective into the city's housing element. This would basically be a policy that says that no city policy should result in a net reduction of affordable housing units. A way to kind of beef that up further would be to have like a condo conversion ordinance or demolition controls that basically prohibit lower income housing from being converted into condos in a way that would displace existing residents who have lower incomes. One thing that could be considered that would be kind of a bigger step is considering the Public Housing Authority. You can't really build public house, the federal government has basically placed pretty set in stone caps on building that, but what public housing authorities do give you access to is basically funds to provide people with housing choice vouchers, which can be used individually or they can be attached to units. Those are called project-based vouchers, which, if you have a new development, one way to set those aside is basically place a voucher on them, which would create housing for. The good thing about the vouchers is they're usually given to people who are making 30 to 50% of the area median income. So you can create truly affordable housing. Producing more housing, obviously, has to be part of the solution. If you have a growing population, the housing has to basically be increased to meet that new demand. We put a variety of different mechanisms that you can explore in the study. Two that I'll highlight is establishing some sort of an accessory dwelling unit program. We kind of put a framework in there for doing that. The nice things about ADUs is they're not very disruptive. They kind of create gentle density, as people sometimes call it, and they're cheap to develop because you don't have to pay for the infrastructure or land cost. You can basically revisit zoning to see if it's possible to increase the level of multifamily zones that permit multifamily housing. Also too, one thing that a lot of research has shown is that it's important for people who are being negatively affected by rising housing costs, have a lot of ability to basically express their needs and their concerns. And one mechanism we considered for doing that would be to have a housing advisory board that developed kind of a plan, which could take or leave some of the suggestions in our particular report to basically, ensure that those needs are represented. So those are kind of a brief as I could be for this study, and happy to answer any questions you might have about it.
Do you have any other questions, Ben? You typed over the question. Okay. Mr. Reporter first.
This is extremely, for me at least, extremely helpful sort of overview of the picture and couple sort of summary ones that I take away, and correct me if I'm off base on them, but one of the things that it seems to come out is that we as a community are kind of bimodal in our experiences, and that is, if you bought a home or if a family bought a home some time ago, you're basically fine, except you are dealing with insurance costs that are rising, possibly some other things. But it's manageable because your value of the home is limited, it's capped on the taxes, how much it can go if you don't sell it at 3% a year. So that taxes can't go up too fast, insurance can, but the rest of them. But if you're renting, the disparity is the disparity between what your income has done over this period and what your rent has done. And it's pretty clear that income hasn't, in fact, you mentioned at one point, some cases it's actually gone down. Whereas the cost of housing has gone way up. And I think probably all of us at this point are familiar with the thresholds. 30% is the recommended part of your income. We have lots of families that are way above that with all the consequences. So just wanted to check whether I'm moderately accurate in that.
Yeah, I would say that in terms of the level of distress and unaffordability, it is unequivocally impacting renters more than homeowners. The only caveat that I would add into that is that when you look at census data, the census basically divides homeowners into two categories. People with mortgages, so those are people who tended to buy a home more recently, and people who own their home free and clear. So people who own their home free and clear, maybe bought it 30, 40 years ago, have much lower incomes, right, on average than newer homeowners. So I would say that that group of people is vulnerable to these insurance increases in a way that probably newer homeowners are less vulnerable to.
That's a good point.
Which seems kind of counterintuitive, that if you own your home free and clear, that you would be worse off. But the income levels of people who own their home free and clear, for whatever reason, my interpretation would be maybe they retired, they bought their house a long time ago, they don't have as much money coming in. They're probably the most vulnerable to like the insurance hikes, or even the Saver Homes Act limits your, annual appraisal to 3%. But even, that going up year over year can, sometimes eventually put people over the edge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So in your numbers, we touched on the vacancies, including seasonal. Is that correct? So with the seasonal data, so people who live here 3 months of the year, 8 months of the year, you took their units and said, if they're vacant, we're lumping them into this.
That's how the Census Bureau counts vacancies. So overall, I think there was over 2,200 vacancies, if I remember correctly. roughly half of those are seasonals, and short-term vacation rentals. If you wanted to figure out the number of seasonals, I think what we would do is we would just subtract the number of vacation rentals we identified, which is 559, from from whatever half of 2,200 is. If you follow my math, if that makes sense.
And just to clarify on your question, are you counting then, I mean, people just, it's not like they're vacant, they're just not.
That's what I'm asking. So if
Yeah.
I close up my
They're not
condo,
rented, they're not rented.
correct, they're not, there's people who live there, they just may not be there when the census was sent, so therefore they didn't answer it.
So they're not abandoned, right? They're
Right.
not currently occupied by somebody who's living.
But people do live there, they just didn't live there when the census was set, because I've got a ton of people, especially when I look at Lake Osborne. I would say that probably 60% of that area, when you look at the condos, a lot of them are seasonal. So that doesn't mean that if I knocked on Mr. Hank's door and said, Hank, you're not gonna be here for 3 months, can we rent out your house? He'd be like, no, you're not renting out my house.
Right.
So I wanna make sure that we're not giving out misinformation, that we're really honing in and saying, okay, out of that number, we truly only have 400 and something that are really vacancies.
Maybe a better way of stating it is that number that I gave of just over 2,200 units are units that are not being occupied full-time by residents.
Okay, so it doesn't mean that they're vacant, boarded up, and that somebody could rent them. That we could turn around and say, okay, we're gonna make these affordable rentals.
The number of homes that are like abandoned, yeah, so the interpretation shouldn't be that you can just like seize these properties. They're not boarded up properties. They're properties that are used however many months somebody who owns a seasonal home uses them for.
Thank you.
I was just gonna clarify on that one.
So that's just important, because for the people who are listening, we're not gonna knock on your doors and tell you, because there are some states who are trying to force people who don't live in their home all year long to rent it when they're not there, which I think is absurd. We're not doing that.
No.
No,
So-
so nothing I said should be taken that
No,
way.
so I wanted to just make sure that people know that. So when I look at your suggestions, we'll call them, implementations. One thing that I see is create new housing stock, help lower those insurance costs. And creating new housing stock means supporting things like the Community Redevelopment Agency when they have projects, supporting development when they come before us, and making sure that we welcome smart development. But I also see in your report that says that we should consider raising heights and densities, which this community is very much against. So to me, going through this after all the time, and this is not on you, of course, we have a very strong community who may care about housing stock, but they care more about density and heights. And they care more about the things that are gonna affect, like you said, the NIMBYs, right? Not in my backyard, do it, but do it over there. So some of this information to me was great, but some of it I was like, okay, I'm not any more clear than I was a year ago on what to do. Because some of these things cannot be done in the city because of the residents and how vocal they are. So I appreciate the data and I appreciate how much time you guys took. I know 2 Habitat homeowners, because Habitat doesn't report on the credit, or they didn't used to, I think they are now, who just walked away from their home. They went back to their country, walked away from the house.
I had stories of that when maybe people.
Yeah, and that, so there's no, we're building homes, we're doing the right things, and sometimes it just slaps us in the face. So no matter what happens tonight, I don't see still a clear path of, okay, this was so informative for me, because now I think I'm even more confused. The Burkle places, the Madison Terrace that we just approved, the Community Land Trust, Adopt a Family Homes, the Salvation Army Homes, and Lakewood Towers, were all of those included in this data?
Yes. I saw it.
Really?
All of those are not in the data that I just presented in my PowerPoint, but in the report, we created an inventory of all of the set aside units.
Okay, so those
In
are all
Lakewood Beach.
included, even if it was temporary housing.
Everything that we
Transitional.
could find, so one issue across the county as a whole is that the county actually recently created a dashboard that makes this a little bit easier. But historically, there's not been a very effective way to create, like, there's not been really a centralized list of everything that exists. But we tried to comb through everything that was available, and everything that we could find that was affordable is in the report. I can't remember at the top of my head what chapter, but it's in there.
Okay, that's all I have, thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Mayor?
I was not, okay.
Thank you. There's so much to go through in the report and in your presentation, and I think there's probably critics of this report who say, well, it's not gonna tell us anything we don't know. And I think to some degree that's true, except we need to quantify what we do know. And I think some of the numbers that you presented tonight and that are in the report, I mean, you know, they're not phenomenal. I get it, Mayor, why you wanted a tissue box over there, because some of it is pretty depressing news, to put it quite frankly, and, you know, there's just, oh gosh, where to begin? There's so many things to consider, I feel like, and I'm curious on some of the things that maybe you've come across. Are you seeing that, like, we often hear the comment and we get the sense that our town, you know, it's not like our neighbors on a multitude of reasons. And one of the reasons is because our town tends to be maybe a little bit younger. You have a lot of young families, which isn't quite the norm, especially for a coastal town. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, when we did the community profile, I think we found that the median age in Lake Worth Beach was almost a decade lower than the county average. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious at how that kind of affected, because, you know, to Vice Mayor's point about our community tends to be vocally against height and higher density. I think that's in many ways definitely true. Obviously, we passed referendum a while ago on that. But I also think there's an opportunity there, and you know, I'll take the beating for this, for saying this, but first, I think you're brave in memorializing the NIMBY acronym in this report. It's there's no nice way to put it. It's a problem that all communities face for sure. But I think, and I'm wondering if this is what you've seen, is with the younger families and the people who are living here, they tend to be young professionals. Like, it always seems like half the people in town that work for South Florida Water Management District for some reason. And so, you know, these are young families that are here for the long term. They really contribute. And one thing that at least I have seen from our community is there seems to be a disparity on how the community views that problem. I think, you know, and this is where I'm just gonna say it, like, yeah, it seems pretty obvious to me that the younger the family is or the person is, the more open they are to density and accepting that in order to live, one, more environmentally friendly and maybe to have a more socioeconomic fairness, is that we do have to increase density. And I think everyone across the board definitely agrees that, well, we don't want to live on top of each other like New York City or something like that, but there's got to be some sort of happy medium. And then so, you know, I think you touched on it on one of your slides, that about the policy change, about the four recommendations. And like one of the things in so many words, you said, you know, consider our changes to our LDRs. And I one of the lines, I forget exactly what it said, but I feel like in so many words, you were pretty much suggesting that maybe for a lot of our city, single family residential is maybe a bit of a hindrance to the progress of the city, because we can't annex out. We're at a point where, you know, we had to focus on redevelopment. There's not exactly a whole lot of infill opportunity. And in order for us to cover what we need to cover and pay our bills and things like that, and also, you know, provide the services we need for people, we need people. And then that equates to, we're gonna need in some areas density. And so, you know, I was just wondering if you kind of got that sense yourself from the community, like, our younger residents tend to be more okay with higher density and height. Is it more obvious, or is it still kind of similar to Vice Mayor Malay? It's still really difficult. We don't exactly have a super solid clear, this is the to-do list to do, but we do have, I think, some really good suggestions.
What I would say is a few things just in response to the various comments about this issue is one, I hope you realize the position I'm coming from, right? I'm a researcher talking about what would improve housing affordability, right? So I'm not talking about this as a community member. I'm not talking about this as somebody sitting up at the dais, right? I'm telling you kind of what changes would reduce the cost of housing. And one thing that is found unanimously again throughout the research is that restrictions on density there are other trade-offs with this, obviously, but if you restrict density and you restrict multifamily development, it increases housing costs, right? One other way of looking at this too is when you avoid kind of height or buildings, it doesn't necessarily make density go away. It limits the stock of affordable rental housing and it pushes people into overcrowded conditions. So I mentioned that there are disparities across the city. In some neighborhoods, there are densities that are like 2,200 people per square mile. There's one neighborhood in the city that has almost 18,700 people per square mile. And that, one way of looking at that is a result of not having enough housing to live in. It forces people to basically be overcrowded. So it's not, you're concentrating density where the apartments are located. It's not, it's limiting it only in some areas, I guess, if that makes sense. Regarding age, I would say in general, younger people are less likely to be homeowners than people who are older. There's been a lot of studies on this lately. I think the average age of buying a house now is like 35 or older, right? So if you are a younger person, you know, and by that I mean, even if you're 33 or 34 and you're struggling under high rents and there's not a whole lot of affordable homes available, my inference would be that group, that demographic would be more likely to support increased density because they stand to benefit more from it.
Thank you. And to clarify, I mean, you had an answer about the whole, you know, short-term rental, seasonal is considered not necessarily vacant, but I think what you were trying to describe is, and this is where my question is the census justification for classifying those units like that? Their justification is they're looking at it as that housing unit is taken off market. It's not available for housing. And generally speaking, if it's seasonal, if they're only here, you know, if somebody is a seasonal resident and they're here for 3 months out of the year, well, that means their primary domicile is somewhere else. So that unit is a secondary unit. It's not a primary housing unit for our community.
Correct. Another way of putting that is the unit is primarily vacant rather than being primarily occupied. So that's why the census calculates it that way.
Off market.
Yeah, and one other kind of nuance I would add on to that is these two things are interrelated, right? Because what can make seasonal homeownership more palatable, obviously, is if it can become a short-term vacation rental that can support the cost of having it.
Hi, Ms. May.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. I majored in sociology, so it's kind of fun. I have a couple of questions. So my first question for you is when you said that there's an 11% increase in the population between 2020 and 2021, where'd you get that data?
The Census Bureau.
But the census only does it on the 20s. And the 30s. So
part of the
how,
Census
where
Bureau-
would the change, I just want to know how like, where do you get,
Oh,
just want to
sure.
get that?
So we do a census, which is a full population count every 10 years. In the intervening years, we have something called the American Community Survey, which the Census Bureau runs. And that's basically what most like urban planners, sociologists, et cetera, use to yes, 10 years is a long time to go without collecting any additional data.
Sure.
So a more accurate response would be it's American Community Survey data for 2021.
Okay, and then, so if you say that there's about 500, or there was when you did the count for the, short-term rentals, there's 551 of the 17,500 units, that's about 3% you're saying are for short-term rentals here in Lake Worth Beach.
That was our best estimate based on the data we had, is that it's about 3% of the rentals or the housing stock in the city.
Okay, and then you also then said that the rest of the vacant was, or most of the rest of the vacant was seasonal rentals, so you could say maybe 13%?
So the rest of the vacancies there's a variety of different categories. The two biggest categories are the single biggest category, because the American Community Survey doesn't distinguish between vacation rental and seasonal owner. That's the largest category. Some of the other categories would be abandoned homes. That's a very small number. There's also homes that are up for sale that are currently unoccupied or rental units that haven't been filled, right? But the largest category in the things that the census, the American Community Survey tracks are the seasonals and the short-term vacation rentals.
Okay. And then, so. And I guess my other question really is, so 2020, we have COVID. 2020, and then everyone's saying I can work from home. I live in Minnesota, it's freezing. I want to work from home in Florida. They come down here and that, and then they end up liking it and buying a house and staying. Right? And then, so we have our increase of our 11%, right? And that is really kind of not saying that there's any fault here at all, but I mean, that's kind of nationwide for any in the Sun Belt, right? It's not just Lake Worth Beach.
That's experienced population growth.
Correct.
The South in general has experienced a lot of growth. I would say that the level of growth here is it's not, would be the, it's
Here
exceptional.
meaning Lake Worth Beach or here
Lakewood
meaning
Beach,
Palm Beach
Palm Beach
County?
are
What's-
really fast growing areas.
What's the difference in the percent between Palm Beach County and Lake Worth Beach then in that time frame?
I'm almost certain that's in the report. I don't recall the figure off the top of my head.
I just wanted to compare how different were we than, say, any other of the towns in Palm Beach County?
From what I recall, because it's a long report. I think it was significantly above what the county was experiencing. And
So it's significantly greater than the county or the same as the county?
significantly higher.
Higher, okay. and
I
I'm
can
gonna-
give you, I don't want to just guess. It's in the report. I'd be happy to get it for you.
Yeah, I would. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's saying that we have 11% increase in our population, but I'm wondering, how does that compare to Green Acres? How does that compare to West Palm Beach? How does it compare to Palm Beach Island? I mean, it's an increase all across the board, not necessarily in Lake Worth Beach. That's what I'm trying to get at.
No, it would certainly be incorrect to say that Lake Worth Beach is unique and experiencing population growth. But what we found is that the level of population growth here was higher than what was happening in the county.
Okay, yeah, I would like you to let me know where that is in this report, if you would have a chance.
Sure.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, and then and your report didn't say anything when you said the suggestions. I just have one question about the suggestion. Hold on one second. Just because I didn't know what it was. Trying to understand. What is a fund a right to counsel for tenants facing eviction?
So during the pandemic, actually, if I'm remembering correctly, I think that the commission, I think, gave a grant to Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach County and the Florida Rural Legal Services. And basically what that does is there's research that looks at the outcomes of people who are filed with an eviction notice. And generally when that happens, tenants are almost always going to court. If they go to court without representation from an attorney, in more than 90% of the cases, the landlord has an attorney. And what that means is that tenants, even if they've been evicted unjustly or improperly, tend to have almost always lose.
Okay, I remember this, and I remember the
It was legal
question.
aid.
Right, I remember that, and I also remember it not necessarily going to people in Lake Worth
No,
Beach.
no, actually.
It went all over the county.
No, that's not true.
Okay, so I really appreciate you answering my questions. Thank you so much. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Betty here. I don't have a lot of questions. People are asking questions I was asked, which is what's helpful. And it is frustrating because I read the report and it is, I mean, essentially very generalized. I mean, you talk to, it's anecdotal, a lot of it. We talked to a guy who said that sort of thing. And I wonder what the value of this is gonna be for us. It's not against you, I'm just trying to think, I hope we get to use this for something that gets us some grants or something, which I think, Ronaldo, was the kind of basis that you, put this idea forward. So essentially, people are not making enough money, rents are too high, housing costs are too high. The thing that's frustrating for us sitting up here is what little effect we can have on that situation. We don't have a bucket of money to say, here's some money to rent the house. I've always thought, and I think this is not a city problem, but one of the problems with getting into a rental in this way, and so much rental is now not mom and pop, it's corporate, but, online ads and all that stuff, so. If somebody could prove that they could pay the rent, and do a financial affidavit, this is what I earn, this is what I spent. I think a helpful way to help people would be to give them the first and last, get them in the apartment. If they can prove that they can rent it, that they can afford it once they get in, I think that would be a tremendous help to people. And I'm saying this to the county, to the state, the universe, to get people in as long as they can maintain it. I just think that would be so helpful. Yeah, I don't know where we go from here. You made a comment about how the owners which bought years ago at low rates, they can afford to keep their rates low, but they're not. It's what will the market bear at this point? And, that's just the way of life. So, Mr. McCoy, you had your hand again?
I just, a couple of follow-up questions. The term vacancies that seems to have drawn some attention, that term you took from the American Community Survey, that's how they call them, is that correct?
Yeah, that's not my term, that's
Right.
the government
I
counts
thought
vacancies.
And the definitions that they use, you didn't set those definitions, the American, the Census Bureau that runs the American Community Survey set those. We may argue with them, we may say, look, for our community, I think that's unreasonable to combine these things, but that's not a choice that you had, nor a choice that we have, that's just the way, when you do surveys, you gotta pick and choose how you do them, and that's a national decision or Census Bureau decision. Is that correct?
That's correct. We
Yeah.
count vacancies in the way that the government does, which,
Right.
there are criticisms that can be levied against that way of counting vacancies, but we took it directly from the American Community Survey.
Just so we're clear on that. I hear the frustration from some of my colleagues that, this is wonderful, gives us a lot of information, but where do we go from here? How do we solve this? And, I hear that question. It's a valid question, and it's one that I've had discussions with people sometimes that, people say, well, the reason the cost of housing is so high is it's simple, I'm assuming we don't need to worry about whatever that noise is. Is it's simple supply and demand, that there is more demand for housing and there isn't enough supply, so we should build more. And I say, well, that's probably got some economic validity to it. That's a pretty general economic principle. It would be weird if it didn't apply here. However, walk that out a bit. As we've pointed out, we're pretty much built out. So there isn't new land, significant amounts to build on within the city of Lake Worth Beach. So you can't build more housing that way. You could do accessory dwelling units. That seems to be nationally something. We had a presentation to the CRA recently from somebody from FIU that said, there's a lot of resistance to that in communities, especially single family residential. But a lot of communities around the country are realizing, well, maybe that's not such a crazy thing to do. There's some pretty good arguments for it. But at some point, you built all the ADUs you can, and then what? I would assume that given, and I always called it, because there was a period of time where I went back and forth quite regularly between the Northeast and Lake Worth, or South Florida in any case. Blue and green for South Florida, brown and gray for the Northeast. Well, blue and green wins that out every time. Meaning we will always have development pressure on it. There will always be people who want to come to South Florida. At some point, you can't just keep building unless you're willing to go up. Hong Kong is willing to go up to 100 stories. We've set some height limits here. We may have to revisit them as a community at some point and say, and I thought it was quite interesting what Commissioner Diaz said, that different folks may have, even within our own community, may have different levels of tolerance for how high we want to go when you balance that. I think some of the frustration that I hear in the community is, okay, well, we built some more buildings, we built the Mid, we built the Bohemian, but the rents on those didn't address the kinds of problems, because the rents are high. They're not fixing that demand problem. So I hear the frustration that, geez, we did a whole study. I thought you were going to bring a magic book of solutions and that was going to solve all our problems. It won't. I think we have to recognize that,
I mean, I would say it's complicated to do this, right? So for a variety of different reasons. One, there's not a magic bullet to
No.
make the housing crisis go away, right? There's not a magical solution that can be implemented that would make housing affordable tomorrow. Two, there's a lot of limitations on the ability of local government to address affordable housing, right? The actors that have the most power to do this are at the state and the federal level. And one thing that's happened at the state level is a lot of the powers that were available to basically address affordable housing have been preempted or scaled back. I would say that it's not, at the end of the study and the final report, I think there were at least 50 recommendations that were provided with different measures that could be taken to basically make the situation better. So I think there are things that can be done. And I think that the challenge, right, is that at least what I'm hearing is that I've researched this issue and kind of provided suggestions for what would bring down housing costs, but there are other priorities that have to be balanced with that. And then there is questions about budgets and costs, and not in the city staff, so I don't know what resources
And
are
things that we
available.
have no control over, like private ownership. And developers who aren't in it for, I mean, not a criticism, but developers who are in it to actually make some money.
Well, that was actually my question. I was asking if we could do a moratorium on LLCs buying residential property.
Okay. I don't lose control here. Okay, so that was, who is that? Were you? Thank you. Okay, so you're next.
Yes, ma'am. I guess the question is more for Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I know that some states have kicked around no longer allowing out-of-state LLCs to buy residential properties, basically stopping Wall Street and hedging from taking over everything. Is there a way that we could do a moratorium in the city to stop LLCs or businesses from buying residential properties?
Not that I know of.
She's got to do a little research on
I'll
that.
have to do a little research.
Because the biggest culprits, as far as, you know, from what I've read and what I've seen, is the LLCs that don't live here, that don't contribute, that are slumlords. And if we can't rely on Washington and Tallahassee, what teeth do we have as a municipality in controlling who buys these properties and the LLCs? Yes, sir.
A couple of the things I mentioned would help with that, like demolition control, the condo conversion ordinance, right? Because that basically protects existing affordable housing properties from getting converted. So not all properties that are purchased are going to be condos that you can prevent from getting converted. Not every time a rehabilitation or development happens, will it be a demolition? But it allows chipping away at the problem or putting up the safeguards that are available.
You mean rentals going to a condo or condo going to rental?
Which
I
might
say
say,
condo conversion,
so what happens oftentimes, I think,
apartments go to condos.
usually low-income apartments are purchased, they're converted into condos, existing residents have to leave.
Mr. Diaz.
Thank you. I mean, I think a good next step is to consider a lot of these recommendations. I mean, I think there's some good recommendations, some that stand out to me, for example, are like the residential unit expansion program, the advisory board. Thing is something that I haven't thought about. That's maybe like a good conversation to have, but I think for a lot of these, a good thing to do. You know, we visited ADUs not too long ago. We did have that conversation. But a lot of these, I look forward to finding time and maybe meeting with Mr. Waters in the near future and seeing what sort of things, because I only somewhat agree with you that I wouldn't say there's nothing we can do. I think there's things we can do. That's generally what government regulation is.
Find out what we can.
Right, and I think starting with some of these recommendations, I think we could find something. I mean, there's no, you know, it's never gonna be a silver bullet. We're not gonna like solve homelessness overnight or anything like that. But I think there are things that we can do to, just like how we've been successful in encouraging development downtown on certain projects and getting things going and moving in that way, I think there are things that we can do in terms of providing housing inventory. You know, one of the things that I think there's only one paragraph that mentioned it. And I think it's a big one is the need for public outreach and education. And often we're up here and, you know, we talk in government acronyms and planning terms and theory, and that doesn't necessarily translate well to general public. And I think we can, you know, maybe there's opportunity there to talk about a lot of things that we talk about that generally and understandably are met with some apprehension. Like a lot of times, sometimes we'll suggest something and the community is like, whoa, that sounds like a terrible idea. And then we kind of lay it out and explain our reasons why and the research behind it and whatnot. And people are like, oh, well, you know, that does kind of make sense. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in what's being proposed or suggested here. I do love Vice Mayor's suggestion about what could we do on limiting who can purchase things. I suspect I already know the answer to that. And yeah, very depressingly. I myself has looked into things, you know, like the law is pretty clear on determining on what can be construed as a vacancy tax and things like that. And you know, we all talk about it, we all see it when we drive by these properties, and it's one of those situations where like, if only I won Mega Millions, I would buy that property because that building would be a perfect apartment building, whatever. And it's sitting there and it's an eyesore, and but I do think there are hopefully some things that we can find that we can work with that has teeth and will have an effect.
It's funny because, you know, you say on the one hand, the people moving in are more affluent than the people that are here. So it's you mentioned gentrification. It's kind of, you know, here comes that balance of gentrification, you know, putting people out besides as opposed to having a more affluent neighborhood. Okay, so I see no lights on.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much for coming. It's very interesting and we'll do our best.
Are we gonna like,
There's nothing to vote on. Today.
well, I know, but for public comment, because of the way it was on the agenda, it's all in one. Are we gonna like, if people here want to comment on the housing study?
Have the cards coming? I think that's the cards about short-term rental.
Okay.
And this is available online. Ask us any questions. Housing studies. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
If you have any follow-up questions and a full-on report, happy to
We'll
clarify.
call you.
anything. Thanks.
Okay, great.
I heard a comment about can we have the presentation online, and I think we should.
Oh, yeah, actually during the presentation, you guys all received it from me. I got this afternoon.
It's on the website.
Yes.
Is it too late to fit on a common council?
No.
So where's the?
About short-term, about.
About the vote on a separate basis.
Well, sure. You've been here to run that.
I knew there was something like that. Walk in the hallway, I think that.
I think there's a card coming up, quickly, we're gonna give the gentleman a little bit, to fill that out. Here. Okay, 3 minutes. Yes, 3 minutes.
Sorry, what was this name?
Name and address, you gotta speak to us.
Hi, my name is Shane Regan from 535 South Conway. I had a question for the,
We don't
The
question,
gentleman?
no, you're addressing us.
I just didn't hear anywhere where it was stipulated in his housing study that the city of Lake Worth Beach, the majority of the houses are historical, and the historical houses overall, to restore those houses, like in the last 10 years that I've been a resident of this town, I've seen that the houses, the rentals have gone up, but I know personally people that have bought houses and renovated these houses at exorbitant costs because they are historical. And in some cases, the city is obligated the people that have bought the houses to spend 3 times as much on roofing and things to restore these properties. And you say, yes, the city of Lake Worth Beach rents have increased more than the average, but we're also talking about an historical community. And this historical community, in my personal case, forced me to put a roof 3 times the cost of what a normal roof would have cost. And then you say, why have the rents increased so dramatically? Well, you know, a lot of the houses, when I moved here 10 years ago, on the block where I live, 8 out of the 10 houses were either abandoned or derelict or unlivable or living conditions that you wouldn't let your dog live in. And today, people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to renovate them. And you say, yes, we have an historical house, but you know, if you're buying a house for $30,000 and you're spending $300,000 on it, you can't expect to rent it at the same price as it was 10 years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rich?
Anthony Segrich, 601 South Palm Way, Lake Worth Beach. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Just a couple of things on the housing study. In 2017, they said that there's a 60% of the individual cost burden. In 2023, it's now 30%. So some of the numbers aren't quite lining up in what they're presenting with that, because by that, it's actually getting better from a cost burdening perspective. They mentioned that there were, in I think 2020, 559 short-term rentals. Out of that, 302 were purchased that year, implying that there was an increase of 302. They use AirDNA to cite their data. And if you go into AirDNA, you'll see, and some of this data has been provided to you guys before, at the end of 2019, there was 550. At the end of 2020, there was about 420. It actually went down. At the end of 2021, it was around 565. It peaked at just over 700 in 2022, and now we're back down to about 450. So his assertion that we added 300 new short-term rentals is completely off base. And I'm basing this on the very source of the data that they were using to source it. Now, did 300 of them sell? Probably, because right now we see over 125 short-term rentals on the market because they can't afford to operate. So during the pandemic, a lot of people did cash in and get out and get higher prices, and they remain short-term rentals, but it's not to imply that we added 300 new units. The study focused entirely on the renters, but as Shane pointed out, us homeowners, we were also suffering. I own a home and I can't manage to afford it without my Airbnb. 67% of the Airbnb owners in this town can't afford their primary residence. I saw a 60% increase in my housing costs due to insurance alone. My mom, who's on a fixed income, saw a 300% increase in her housing costs because of condo fees and insurance. And we're homeowners.
Thank you, that's time.
Thanks. Okay, we are gonna take a quick comfort break. It's 7:24. We're gonna try to get back here by 7:30.
I like that.
I've been watching a lot of British shows lately.
I need.
That should be there for staff.
William, can you unmute that computer for the commission, please?
And then mute Michelle.
Madam Mayor, it is 7:34 and we have reconvened.
Thank you very much. I think, I'm asking for consensus. We have a lot of, we have some public comments. I'd like to do the public comments first, before we start discussing it so that we have an idea. So, we're gonna start with, Amy Mihilich, Amy. Amy, come on up. And then after that, we have Helen, I'm really, Batanzas, thank you. And then Jesse Hilliard.
Hi, Amy Mihalik, 2032 Collier Avenue. I wanted to speak tonight in support of keeping short-term rentals. At least for me, I rent a room in my house. And for me, that has been a really great source of income. Like the gentleman said, like I don't think I could really afford my house without the help of Airbnb over the years. I've been a host since 2014 on and off, in periods where I need extra income. And that's allowed me to make necessary upgrades to my house, like putting in hurricane impact windows, getting my pool refinished. And especially with the cost of insurance going up, I find that I rely on Airbnb more to just help to pay the bills and cover the bills. I bought my house in 2010, so I got it at a really good deal. And it's still a lot with just a single income. So Airbnb, renting my room, I love being a host. I feel like it's an asset to our community because I'm able to recommend places for people because I'm having that one-on-one interaction with guests. So, telling them to where to go for businesses and recommendations. So I really think in that way, it is an asset to our community. At least with like the room rentals. And if it's homeowner, hosts.
Thank you. Actually, I skipped someone. Someone wrote a card here, V.
I'm V.
What?
I'm V.
Well,
Okay. That's
I mean,
my neighbor.
I guess you'll expound on that a little bit.
Oh, I don't even talk about myself.
What?
I don't even talk about myself.
No, your name.
My name is V.
That's your first and last name?
It is not my first and last name. My name is V. Iasello, and I recently moved back to Lake Worth, living on D Street now. I'm speaking to the short-term rental.
What's your address?
It is, I just moved, 1510 D Street,
North Sea?
North D.
North, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I originally, again, I mentioned before, I originally left Lake Worth because my apartment I was previously living in was turned into a B&B. And it was the whole unit. I actually really thank my neighbor here for drawing the difference between people who are simply renting out a room and people who are buying up entire buildings and then turning them into what are essentially illegal hotels. I mean, they're against the city ordinance. We're enforcing other city ordinances. All you're voting on tonight, I know, is whether or not you should be enforcing an existing ordinance. I have neighbors on 19th Street or 19th Ave who had an ordinance violation for having too many sticks in their yard. Their yard has a lot of trees, which is to get great benefit to the community. But, I'm just using an example here of a pretty superfluous sounding ordinance that was enforced at great economic cost to them. Whereas we're seeing people operating businesses that are against our city ordinances and they are not being enforced. And that is a problem for all of us, even if it's 500 units, if those 500 units are entire homes, as mine was, which again is anecdotal, but just walking around, you can see which homes have a little lockbox. They're not on the market. These are houses that are, the entire property is a hotel. And it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable for families to not be able to afford to live. We're talking about building up. I don't think a lot of people do want to build the city up to that height. I think that people would rather that available units be available to the people who need them. And so I think that, we are obligated to enforce this ordinance, especially if we're going to be enforcing all kinds of other ordinances that, from which families suffer economic hardship when they can't pay these fees. but these people are making money off of the city and it's illegal.
Thank you.
Time.
Helen Francis. And then Jason.
Hi, I'm Helen Batanzas, and I've been a resident of Lake Worth Beach for 3 years. In 2014, I was
Address for the record, please.
Your name and address.
76 18th Avenue South. I'm gonna read this because it's long. In 2014, I was diagnosed with severe osteoarthritis, and within 2 years found myself permanently disabled and unable to work. In 2017, my oldest daughter was getting married, and the photographers needed a place to stay. At the time, I was living out west and I had a big home, and so they stayed with me. Upon the departure, they gave me a heartwarming gift and told me that they felt so welcome in my home, that I had offered them a level of hospitality that they had never experienced. I thought it was so sweet of them, and I went to bed that night remembering what they had said. I also thought about a movie that I had loved so dearly, Forrest Gump. Something about that movie stirred something inside of me when I saw it for the first time. I thought it was fascinating how Forrest's mom opened up their home to weary travelers, complete strangers, people passing through all walks of life and sharing a meal and stories together. Over the next few months, I often found myself thinking about what those photographers had said to me and thinking about that movie. Maybe I could open up my home to travelers. And in 2018, I took a leap of faith, and that would be the beginning of my hosting journey. I've been a short-term rental host now for almost 7 years, and it has been so rewarding. I've met so many people from all over the world and made some wonderful connections. Hosting is the one thing that gives me joy and purpose in life. Airbnb gave me a platform where I could find a purpose for my life while giving back to my guests and my community. The income that I received from my short-term rental of health has allowed me to buy a little cottage in Lake Worth Beach within a few miles from the Intercoastal. Being in this cottage is my happy place, and if I did not have this income, I would not be able to support myself or my family. At this time, I can't even afford the homeowner's insurance. I can't emphasize how much it would affect my ability to host if the city bans short-term rentals or regulates them in a way that would make it difficult for me to continue to host. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Ma'am, would you write your phone number on this card?
I have a few questions. I can't do it here. So you want me to read it? You can help out. I'd rather you read it. I can give it back to you to read. Name and address. Shane is after that.
Hi, my name is Jessie Hilligas. I live at 124 North Ocean Breeze. Been a resident for 34 years. I own properties here in the city and have been a long-term rental landlord for many, many years. I have 9 units. I have one unit that I use for my family. I sold a family home of 60 years, and I cannot fit 6 of them in my home. Not that they come 6 at one time, but I have a little 1-bedroom house. So I have that for my family, but I supplement it with Airbnb. So I will not allow more than 2 people in that 1-bedroom house. Where I think sometimes when people have problems with the Airbnbs, they have like 2 people in 1 bedroom and have 2 out on a couch. I walked into one, I have seen a bunch of people getting out of it because they went into it as a business. And I walked into one house, it was a 2-bedroom. They had 3 queen-size beds in there and another thing out in the living room. 8 people, where that should have only been 4 people in that house. So I think that would cut down on problems, you know, with Airbnbs. I've never had a problem with mine because everybody's nice. Also, it's good business for the city. I recommend everywhere around here. And I've always just had nice people. No parties, no smoke. And that's it.
Thank you.
Jane, you're good thing.
Make you feel great.
Hi, my name is Shane Regan, 535 South Palm Way. Firstly, I have a short-term rental in the city. I've been very active. I believe I've met with every one of you at some stage or another and discussed our points of view. We've had many meetings, and over the last 10 years, we've requested on every time we've had a meeting, which I want to say, I've lost count. We've asked for the law that you say that is on the books to actually be presented, which nobody at this table, I believe, has ever showed it to us, or produced it in any way. Speaking to our neighbors, you know, as we live in the community and we believe in living in a good area and living in a community, I find that the people that are against the short-term rentals, most of the times it's about parties or traffic. So the problem with the parking, I believe, is a problem with Lake Worth Beach as a whole, and a lot of the buildings don't have enough parking, and the city doesn't allow, in many cases, that you add double car gap driveways or extra parking. So they're creating their own problems. As far as the parties, I've called PSBO or PBSO myself several times where I've had guests staying in our house that have been creating disturbance, and found that the city is not willing to actually back us up or in any way stop incidences where we've had parties and wanted to try and stop that. A lot of the Airbnb hosts or short-term rental hosts are very proactive. They live in these communities and try to enforce good sense regulation and without the support of the city. I've also spoken to every restaurant owner and business owner on Lake and Lucerne personally, and have petitions signed by everyone apart from 2 businesses on both of the streets saying that they are pro short-term rentals, and a lot of their income comes from the short-term rentals. They come to the city, they don't eat at home, they go out, they eat in the restaurants, they buy stuff at the stores. It's people on holiday that go shopping. And if
Thank you, that's time.
Many of these businesses would fail. Thank you very much.
Up next is Anthony Segrich. And for Anthony, it's Alexander. It's still here.
Anthony Segrich, 601 South Palm Way. For about the last year and a half, we had an artificial turf ban. We had it on the agenda as an artificial turf ban. We talked about it as an artificial turf ban. We prosecuted people, we fined them, we placed liens on their houses because the city definitively had a 100% absolute artificial turf ban. And then all of a sudden, we find out it's a lie. The same scenario is going on here. Before we go down this road and try to enforce a ban, we need to see the law. And to give you an example of what happened to cities that went down this road without actually having the law on the books, this is what happens. The AG opinion to Flagler County. Single-family zoning ordinance cannot be interpreted to prohibit vacation rentals when the ordinance did not prior to June 1st, 2011 restrict rental of such property in county and have no regulations specifically governing vacation rentals. We have no mention of vacation rentals in our code prior to 2011. Dal Bianco versus City of Fort Lauderdale. Local code single-family dwelling definition did not expressly address the use of dwelling. Therefore, city could not use the provision as a basis for sanctioning the owner in code enforcement cases for use of the dwelling as vacation rental. City argued that the business short-term rental leasing was prohibited under its code, but couldn't point to an express provision. Again, we don't have one. And even in the backup for today's meeting, it says we don't have one. Ocean Edge Development Corp. versus Town of Juno Beach. Zoning ordinances must be construed broadly in favor of the property owner absent and clear intent to the contrary. After the fact, interpretations of an ordinance's intent will be scrutinized if used to fill gaps in the text of the ordinance. Owners should be entitled to rely on clear and unequivocal language of an ordinance affecting their property. And the last one actually deals with some of the suggestions of how we're going to regulate short-term rentals by turning them into commercial properties. This is also being settled by the courts. Santa Monica Beach property owner decision in its appeal versus a court. The critical inquiry is not the duration of the tenancy, but the character of the actual use of the property by those residing thereon. Additionally, the court explained that because the proper focus is on the actual use which is undertaken on the property, the nature of a property's use is not transformed from residential to business simply because the properties may be subject to a regulatory scheme that requires licensure and the appealees may earn income from the rentals. Finally, the court noted that because restrictive covenants are silent on the issue of short-term rentals, any ambiguity as to whether the use is permitted must be resolved in favor of the appellee's free and unencumbered use of their properties.
Thank you, that's time.
Thank you, Mr. Segrich. Up next is, did Alexander go? You asked me. Lucia Hare Levy. Lucia? I'm sorry? I can't hear you. Sorry. Oh, that's you and you.
Yes.
Oh. Adam Youngblood. Adam? And after that, Elaine DeRiso, she's still here? Up there.
I'm here. Hello.
And you're here.
I'm here. Hello, my
Name
name
and
is
address,
Adam.
please.
Adam Youngblood. I live at 1705 North M Street. My comment would basically be, again, with some of my neighbors, I would be curious to find out exactly what the law is surrounding the ban. I do believe that you should be enforcing all ordinances. You have no problem enforcing ordinances relating to turf. You did that for several years, as the gentleman brought up. Even though you have turf on your city property that we do go and enjoy as neighbors, but we couldn't have it as personal private residents. A lot of people have issues with the noise, the parties and all that. I think some of these income-based problems, if you need your home to provide income for you, that could be solved by converting it to a long-term rental. That would also help solve some of the housing crisis. So you now have a long-term resident of Lake Worth Beach who would also go to restaurants, who would also go to shops, who would also go to the beach, who would use public transportation. And it would help increase the amount of actual housing we have. But with short-term rentals, it seems to be a little bit more quick turn and burn, less investment of your time, a little more profit. So I think if you're willing to rent out part of your house or some of your properties, it should be for the long term first and foremost, to help bring more residents to Lake Worth Beach. Second, it often increases the property value because long-term rentals, renters tend to have a higher standard of acceptance for what they're going to deal with versus short-term rentals. A short-term rental will go into a place, notice the poor quality of the renovation, and move on. They might leave a bad review, but that's not going to prevent them. A long-term rental will demand a higher standard of living. So it will increase property values over time. And then the last thing I guess I would say is, if the number one problem is the amount of housing, we should simply be enforcing the ban to try and move the corporations who have come in swaps and bought up land and will not sell it. They never have to. They bought in cash. They have the capital. It's not families working, not families contributing. They're just making money hand over fist. And that is affecting everybody unilaterally. So if we have an ordinance on the books, it just needs to be enforced. Sure, we can look at exceptions based on rooms, based on occupancy. But at this time, that just needs to be found out. You guys have no problem droning in properties to assess for fencing, that's Lake Worth Beach.
Thank you, that's time.
Thank you.
21st century problems require
And we
21st
don't
century.
drone, correct?
We don't use
It just, we don't drone, and that
I have very specific instances where it has been done.
All right, well. Fine. Name and address, please.
Elaine DeRiso, 301 Dartmouth Drive. And my only objection to Airbnbs is within probably, I don't know, within a house or two for me, all surrounding me, probably 30% of those are Airbnb short-term rentals. And only once has there ever been an issue with too much noise. Everybody keeps their property up, no issues with any of that. My only issue is it's not a neighborhood. It's not, I want to have a neighbor that I can go borrow a cup of sugar from. I want to live in a community, more so than a resort. However, I would have no objection to people renting out their rooms, people renting out a floor, if they're on the property or close to the property. I'm perfectly fine with that. So I just wanted to know that for me, it's sense of community. Thanks.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have from here, Madam Clerk. I believe you got some. I read it.
I do, and I have two people who want to read their own comments, so I will.
Start with them.
Michaela Posk,
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Hi, Michaela Posk, 120 Harvard Drive. I'm asking to please allow short-term rentals to continue operating in Lake Worth Beach. Lake Worth residents who are opposed to STRs will try and paint us owners with incorrect broad brush strokes. I'd like to share the actual human story behind our small, responsibly run Airbnb business. I grew up here and met my husband locally. My mom and in-laws live a few blocks away. I'm studying out of state to become a therapist, and putting our home on Airbnb has meant that while we temporarily live somewhere else, I can continue to build roots where I grew up. We can't wait to move back to raise our young daughter. We take immense pride in our property. We hire multiple Lake Worth businesses to assist in the maintenance and upkeep of the house. We prioritize the integrity and peace of the neighborhood over profits every single time. Guests who don't follow the house rules are told that they'll be asked to leave immediately. In the 3 years that I've hosted, we've never had any complaints or had to ask anyone to leave. Further, we don't make money on this. Due to taxes, insurance, and being discerning about who we rent to, we lose money every month. But thanks to Airbnb, we make enough for owning in this neighborhood that's so special to us to be possible. A neighbor and longtime Lake Worth resident who was walking by our house said that because of the upgrades that we made, it inspired him to make upgrades to his. Our neighborhood continues to look and feel better because of the pride all of us owners take in our homes, whether we're full-time residents or not. I also want to call out the study cited 200 complaints since 2018. In 16 years, that sounds actually like a huge success. There are probably more complaints about the Publix, and I don't think we're talking about banning the Publix. Finally, if we didn't Airbnb our home, it would sit empty while we are not there. Isn't it better for it to host tourists who will add to the neighborhood and visit local businesses? Thank you.
Thank you. Next up.
Next person, Tom Donnell, you have 2 minutes. Are you there?
He's muted. There you go.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. Tom Dennell, 1116 North Lakeside. Thanks for letting me dial in here. By the way, I've got a newborn at home and this makes it a lot easier. I'm asking to please vote to effectively allow short-term rentals to continue in Lake Worth Beach and to do so with as little regulation as possible, please. I'm a millennial. I stopped eating avocado toast long enough and stretched to buy a second home because I want to move to Lake Worth Beach and be close to my aging parents. And I now use that home to host family and have a place to stay when I visit my parents. When we're in town, we definitely positively contribute to the city. And my wife and I are planning to raise our kid in this home. Having a short-term rental allows us to make that a reality. As the other speaker said, we actually lose money on this as well. Lake Worth Beach Utilities actually makes more money than I do from this short-term rental. We don't enforce the regulation as a city because Airbnbs make money for Lake Worth Beach via tourism and they're good for the city. I think the study we all just had to sit through was very sad and depressing and methodologically questionable. It seemed very politically motivated for what should have been a neutral academic study. What do you expect from today's college campuses? And it completely ignored the primary reason rents are high here. People want to live in Lake Worth Beach. It's a great city. And that is thanks in part to the work of the commissioners and the vice mayor and the mayor. So thank you for that. So are we really saying that we're going to create a fantasy island of affordable housing in the middle of Palm Beach County by getting rid of a couple hundred short-term rentals? It sounds absurd to me. And we would need to do all those recommendations in the report for that to work. And we know that's not practical. So the link between short-term rentals and affordability is basically zero. Short-term rentals do not make a dent. Again, we're talking a couple hundred homes in a city of 38,000 people. The benefits of short-term rentals are numerous for our city. Tourism drives the economy, and banning short-term rentals means we're saying we want to add even more regulations that tell more homeowners what they can and cannot do with their property. That is not a road we want to go down. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I have a few, like about 7 or 8 comments to read.
Okay.
The first is from Willie Volk, 216 North K Street. Dear Mayor and Commissioners, please do not ban short-term rentals. Running a short-term rental helps my family afford to live here amid inflation, rising taxes, and astronomical insurance rates. Taxes and insurance are the top factors impacting affordable housing in Lake Worth Beach, not short-term rentals. Short-term rentals comprise less than 2% of the housing stock. They are not making the other 98% unaffordable. Short-term rentals positively impact Lake Worth Beach. Since we don't have a hotel downtown, short-term rentals allow visitors to travel here and spend their money. Banning short-term rentals won't immediately bring affordable housing to the city. You'll lose tourist dollars and further damage the downtown corridor, which already has too many vacancies. I've reviewed the municipal code and found no ban. I intend to fight the city if you try to ban them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rachel McDermott, 316 Princeton Drive. City leaders in Lake Worth Beach must enforce the ban on short-term rentals to address the critical shortage of affordable housing for essential workers and residents. The proliferation of short-term rentals has exacerbated the housing crisis, making it difficult for citizens to find affordable long-term housing options. Enforcing the ban will help maintain the town's character by preserving its historic neighborhoods and ensuring equitable access to housing for all residents. By prioritizing this and prioritizing this issue, city leaders can foster a more inclusive community that supports both current and future generations. Elvin Silvestri, 310 North Federal Highway. I disapprove enforcement of the city current prohibition of vacation rentals. Marcia Pitts, 501 North F Street. Good evening. I am for the current short-term policy that the city has established. However, there needs to be regulation with the short-term rental websites. It is important to notify these websites that certain areas of Lake Worth Beach cannot be rented out for less than 60 days. All of the short-term rental website needs to be notified. Also, the owners of short-term rentals need to officially turn in a document with short-term websites they are advertising their short-term rentals. Many of these short-term rentals need to be limited to less than 5% of the community, as they destroy the fabric of the neighborhood when there are too many short-term rentals. I think after 10 years, a short-term rental needs to be homesteaded. Adrian Copeland, North Palm Way. Good evening. Please think about the following. Ever know anyone who has had to tent their home? Airbnbs offer a cost-effective alternative to hotels for our friends and neighbors and your constituents by allowing them to cook their own meals there and stay in their own familiar and safe surroundings while tenting their homes. We all know how tight money is right now, and a short-term rental stay helps a small business owner host and your constituents both out. Have you or someone you know ever had to deal with placing their mother or father in hospice, or attend a funeral, or visit a loved one in the hospital? Airbnbs offer a private, quiet place to stay for the out-of-town families and friends of your constituents during these trying times. What about a family visit, celebration, the birth of a grandchild, a graduation, or family reunion? Aren't Airbnbs a wonderful choice, allowing relatives to all stay together in one home? And ask a realtor how many people visit our area seeking to purchase property and prefer to stay in the neighborhood they aspire to live in. And how many of your constituents, especially seniors, need the extra income to make ends meet? These are some examples I hope you will indeed think about that are a big benefit to your constituents. Please do not let a few rotten apples spoil the entire bunch. We need to keep our short-term rentals. Thank you for your consideration. Todd Kimberlane, 320 Northeast Street. As a concerned resident of Lake Worth Beach, I'm alarmed by the city's failure to enforce a 60-day minimum for rental properties in residential neighborhoods. This lack of enforcement has allowed platforms like Airbnb and similar services to drastically alter the character of our community. Investors are buying up properties with the sole intention of using them as short-term rentals, and our neighborhoods are paying the price. Areas like College Park, Parrot Cove, Mango Grove, South Bryant Park, and South Palm Park are being inundated with investor-owned properties, and permanent residents are left dealing with the consequences. This unchecked growth of short-term rentals is pushing out long-term residents, driving up housing costs, and diminishing the sense of community that makes Lake Worth Beach so special. The city's failure to act is effectively prioritizing investors over residents. By allowing this to continue, we are permitting the transformation of our town into a place where properties are treated as commodities, not homes. We need the city to step up, enforce the STR regulations that are already in place, and protect the integrity of our neighborhoods. I urge the commission to put residents first and stop allowing investors to run amok. Our community deserves stability, affordable housing, and the chance to thrive, not to be overshadowed by a flood of short-term rental properties that only benefit a select few. Kara Jennings, 822 North C Street. Good evening, Mayor and Commission. I live in a single-family neighborhood zoned neighborhood. I live in a single-family residential zone neighborhood. I bought a house in a residential neighborhood that is not zoned for motels. However, since the city has refused to enforce the code on short-term rentals, I now have multiple neighbors who are renting their properties as motels. Instead of neighbors who I can build a stronger neighborhood with, I have random people staying for a few days. Short-term rentals are weakening the fabric of our residential neighborhoods. What started as a cool novelty of people renting out a spare bedroom in a home they occupied has turned into a large-scale problem. As the study has shown, STRs are impacting housing availability. Across the city, there is widespread agreement that the Airbnb-style short-term rentals are a problem. A very few vocal short-term rental owners, some of whom are likely here tonight, believe they deserve to break the rules and bank off Airbnbs. Meanwhile, your long-term owners and renters are dealing with the impacts. Since the governor has restricted our ability to create a short-term rental code that would fit our city's needs, the only option is to enforce the existing code. Please respect our current zoning and enforce the existing code regarding short-term rentals. Noah Stanislavsky, 615 Lake Avenue. As a local business owner who operates a bar downtown on Lake Avenue, I'm writing to express my strong support for maintaining the ban on short-term rentals such as Airbnbs and to urge you to resume enforcement as recommended by the recent study. While short-term rentals may seem beneficial on the surface, they don't provide the kind of long-term economic stability our community needs. As a business owner, I can tell you firsthand that consistent local customers drive significantly more sales than transient tourists staying in short-term rentals. Local residents invest in our downtown businesses over time, contributing far more to the local economy than tourists who come and go without a lasting connection to the community. Additionally, we will soon have the beautiful new Gulfstream Hotel, which will offer a proper space to host our visitors and tourists. With this new hotel, there's no need to undermine our residential neighborhoods by legalizing short-term rentals. The Gulfstream will be more than capable of accommodating tourists while allowing us to preserve the character and affordability of our community for full-time residents. If we're serious about addressing affordable housing and protecting the local economy, we need to focus on keeping homes available for those who live and work here, not for short-term visitors. I strongly encourage you to follow this study's findings and prioritize the needs of our community by upholding the short-term rental ban and resuming enforcement. Thank you for your consideration. Kate Schofield, 219 North Lakeside Drive. Please start enforcing the existing ordinance re short-term rentals must be 60-day minimum rental. Chelsea Tinney, 1616 North M Street. I am writing to express my support of the short-term rental ban. I hope to encourage you to vote in favor of continuing the ban on Airbnbs and other short-term rentals, along with resuming enforcement. Short-term rentals are undermining the stability of our housing market, and the ban is crucial for maintaining affordability and community. I want to raise a family in a community of people who care about their homes, not tourists around every corner. I know tourism is important to our town, which is why I support the Gulfstream Hotel, along with more hotels in our town. I know that the older residents in the community benefit from Airbnbs, but I encourage them to consider renting their properties to long-term tenants once again. I can confidently speak for many people around my age in their 20s and 30s, as I know many who are negatively affected by short-term rentals and are also in support of the ban. Many of them have had to move out of their apartments downtown because they were being turned into Airbnbs. Our neighborhoods are being increasingly bought up by investors who prioritize profit from short-term rentals over long-term community well-being. This not only pushes housing prices higher, but also forces residents and prospective homeowners to compete with a global pool of investors. It's simply not fair to those who want to make Lake Worth Beach their permanent home to have to compete in such an environment. And the last comment is from Robert Caserta, 515 North D Street. I'm writing to strongly support keeping the ban on short-term rentals like Airbnbs, and I ask that you resume enforcement as the study you commissioned suggests. As a young father, trying to find a home in the city has been incredibly difficult. Out of 6 different homes I looked at, every single one was bought up by investors, and all of them were eventually turned into Airbnbs. It's frustrating to see family homes turned into rentals for tourists instead of being available for people like me who want to settle down here. How am I supposed to explain to my child that we lost our chance at a home because of investors flipping properties? Short-term rentals drive up housing prices, make it harder for local families to find affordable housing, and strip away the sense of community that Lake Worth Beach is known for. Our town is built on short-term relationships and connections, not on temporary visitors. We don't need more Airbnbs, especially when we have the new Gulfstream Hotel opening up to host our tourists without taking away housing from locals. Please listen to the study's findings and vote to continue the enforcement of the short-term rental ban. It's important to prioritize the people who live here and want to raise their families in this community. Thank you for your communication.
Thank you, that's it.
That is it.
Okay, I just have a couple, what, were you prepared to do a presentation or what were we gonna do? What are we doing here?
For the record, William Waters, Community Sustainability Director. We have the presentation that was given to you back in February of 2023. We can give it again. There's not much difference that's happened over the intervening months or year. We can give it if you'd like, or we can entertain your questions. Got Yolanda Robinson from Code Compliance, myself, and the city attorney, Ms. Linehan.
Okay, I have a couple quick questions.
Before you do, can I just ask a question? Just, is there any way, because everyone referenced the ordinance, that we can all hear that?
Just let me, that's about what I'm about there. And in the letter that you wrote, that if we're gonna enforce this, my first question is, what are we enforcing? Is it the 60-day minimum limit?
Yes.
Okay, and that's part of our ordinances and has always been part of our ordinance.
It was in the 2010 published zoning code, and it was carried over, and then we replaced the zoning code with land development regulations in August of 2013, and we maintained the same definition for transient public lodging, which said 60 days or less. Within both the zoning code and the land development regulations, the definitions for single family, two-family, multifamily it's expressly written that they are not available as transient lodging.
And transient lodging has its own definition, which is less than
60 days, right?
And is transient lodging forbidden in our code?
No, we allow motels, hotels,
Because
other
there is
types
a-
of transient
Okay.
lodging, but now we are different than the state's definition for transient lodging. The state has transient lodging defined as 30 days or less. I am unable to determine when the city adopted as 60 days or less, but it's long before 2010.
Okay, that was just, I just want to get that basic question. So what we're talking about is the 60-day rule. Okay, so, Mr. Boyd had his light on, I think, first.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I asked for indulgence that, I want to make sure before we get into decision making that we're all fully on the same page. I'm going to try to describe what that page is and ask for William and the attorney and Yolanda to correct me if I have anything incorrect. Because one of the challenges for us as decision makers is that there's a lot of unclarity in the community. First question. If we wanted, and I guess this is to either the attorney or William, if we wanted to regulate, as some of the comments alluded to, and ask that short-term rentals of less than 60 days be allowed in some parts of the town, say near the downtown, but not in more residential neighborhoods, is that an option for us?
No.
If we wanted, so that was a clear no, I believe, and I'm seeing a no from the attorney. So the idea that we think about our city and say, well, it could work in this part, but it could not work in that part, it's not an option. That is not a choice that we have as a dais, as a commission. If we wanted to choose between allowing people to rent a room out of their house as a short-term rental versus allowing people to rent a whole house out, can we regulate differently on one or the other?
Well, that's an interesting question because we don't have any regulations that deal with renting out a room in a home where the owner occupies it. We don't even require a residential rental license to have a roommate or to have a room rented out on a whatever basis. I think Elizabeth, Ms. Lillihan and Yolanda and I will have to put our heads together, but I don't think there's anything in our code that would preclude anyone from renting out a room. If you want to have a roommate, if your roommate happens to come through the Airbnb or the vacation rental platform or Vrbo, whatever, that's how they come.
So that's a very, that I was not aware of. That's a very important piece of information for people in the community who feel comfortable with owner occupied situation and renting to a guest or a roommate or whatever. That would be allowed under our current rules. But renting the whole house out is a different deal. That would not be
Correct.
What if we said, we're comfortable with short-term rentals, including renting the whole house, but we've had a number of people who commented and said, there's 4 of them on my block. So we say, okay, let's restrict the density to only 1 on a block or 2 on a block or whatever we come up with for a number. Can we do that?
No.
Okay, so that's another desirable feature of regulation in our community. We do not have that option. Let's be very, very clear. I don't remember if there's any other, those are kind of the big ones that come up. Another question that has come up repeatedly is, well, show me the law that says that we can't do this. And the answer to that, I believe, is we don't have an explicit law that says you can't do Airbnbs or vacation rental by owner or short-term rentals. What we have is what you described. Could you describe that again? And
well, there's components to it. We have what's called an inclusionary code, and under its definition, it states that any uses that are not expressly permitted are by definition prohibited. Our previous code in 2010 was an inclusionary code, and our current one is a inclusionary code. It has a definition of how that works. We also have a permitted use table in our current code, and vacation and short-term rentals appear nowhere in it. Under the 2010 code, the uses that were allowed in general were all specifically listed. What could happen in a single family house? I'll put it out there. Nowhere in our code does it say that you cannot have a slaughterhouse.
right, but you can't have them.
You can't have one because it's not expressly permitted. So if we want to go down that road and all the prohibitions we wouldn't want to see, we'd have probably Webster's Dictionary attached to our code. So the city chose at some point in its infinite wisdom to have an inclusionary code versus a different type of code. So all the uses that are allowed are actually expressly written out.
And that's fairly common in code.
It was. It's not as much so now. Nowadays, there have been some arguments against inclusionary codes because of some ambiguities, but ours is still intact and still legally enforceable. People have gone to performance codes and other types of codes. And again, ours is a hybrid code, the edition that we adopted in 2013, but it's still, the basis is an inclusionary code. It's still defined there. And it's a Euclidean base with other pieces attached to it.
So a follow-up to that one is it reasonable, and I get that, and this is maybe more for the attorney, but for both, is it reasonable to say that someone contemplating a particular use in a residential neighborhood has a responsibility to do due diligence and find out, are slaughterhouses allowed in residential neighborhoods? Is that a reasonable legal expectation that if you're going to undertake something, you got to do your own homework, whether that's allowed or not?
Yes.
And I believe the answer you said was yes.
Yes, that is a reasonable expectation for any land use rights.
Okay. Then that sounds like anyone who has chosen to put a short-term rental in a residential neighborhood has done that with, on the cities and other residents' part, a reasonable expectation that they did that either not knowing because they didn't look, but they should have looked, that that was not an allowed use.
Correct.
That was not very clearly stated.
In
I admit,
addition,
but-
and I think I've spoken to you, most of you about this, and Ms. Robinson can back me up on it. Most of the residential rentals that hold themselves out as short-term rentals have a Lake Worth residential business license. And on that business license, it has a little note saying, cannot lease for less than 60 days.
So that seems, if you've gotten a business license, it is a reasonable expectation of all other residents that you would read the business license, and if it says you can't do it, and you choose to do it, that responsibility is on the person who is doing a use that is not in fact allowed. That is not other residents limiting the property rights of a property owner. We limit all sorts of things, as you mentioned. I have a house. I've decided that I'm gonna do a slaughterhouse, to use your example, and I'm just gonna do it. Well, if I get in trouble with the city, I can't say, well, it's my property, I can do what I want. No, in a community, you have limitations on what you can do. You've got to check out, can you do that, in fact? Our options, as I understand it, the state put in place in 2011-ish.
It's actually I think it's 2012, but it went back to the correction date of June 2011.
Okay, they put in a statute or something or other, some legal thing that says that communities, municipalities cannot regulations on short-term rentals. Is that correct?
Unless you had them in effect on or before June of 2011, you could not adopt any new ones regulating or stipulating parameters on the short-term rental.
Well, let me clarify, because there are some things that you can do, but you cannot prohibit vacation rentals or regulate the duration or frequency of vacation rentals.
And it sounds like from my early questions, you also can't regulate the geography, the density.
That's prohibiting it in certain areas, which is.
Right. So, and if I understand the concept of grandfathering correctly, we were grandfathered in because we happen to have this 60-day limit on the books, inclusionary, or however we had it, but we had it on the books prior to that. So we are allowed to enforce that should we choose to do so. If we changed anything about that 60 days, is it correct understanding that we now lose our grandfathering and fall under the 2012 state statute, which says you can't regulate them?
Well, we fall under that anyway, except with the 60-day limit. right?
But if we were to alter the 60 days, if we made it at this point 61 days or 59 days, now we've changed it and we are no longer grandfathered in. Is that more or less correct? So I'm hearing a yes. So the grandfathered status that our city has that allows us to regulate them is continuous. It's not something that is cast in stone. If we change anything, we lose it. And we default to the state of we can't regulate it at all. That is important for us to remember here in our decision making, I think. And it's important for the community to be aware that, sort of as I was alluding to earlier in my questions, there are many forms of regulations that we would like to have, that many people would support, including many in the dais, many in the community. We cannot do those. We do not have that option. Our only options are to give up on any regulation and default to the state telling us we can't do it at all. Or I think we have two other options. One is to enforce our ban of 60-day, that's the minimum, or to continue what we've been doing under the previous administration up till 2021 of we have the ban, but we've given instruction to code, don't enforce it. Which is a kind of an awkward situation, as some of the residents pointed out. Well, geez, you know, as a city, that seems a little bit weird that you're gonna have some rules, you're gonna enforce those, but you're gonna have other uses and you're not gonna enforce those.
Well, I'd like to clarify that a little bit.
Okay.
Is that the previous commission and the commission before that, all were banking on the legislature putting some mechanisms in to return some of the home rule. So they didn't specifically say do not enforce it. They said abate or hold back enforcement of the vacation rental until we render a decision one way or another, how we're going to move forward. That time period of waiting for the legislature has come and gone like 8 times, 9 times. Because one of the first things that when the new city attorney's office was hired, when Ms. Humphreys and had an in-house attorney was relinquished by the commission that came into office in November of 2011, was we tried to come up with a consortium of vacation rental owners, which did not go very well. There was a lady who represented several of them from Fort Lauderdale, and we tried to get someplace. So this goes back almost 13 years. And it was all like, hopefully we're gonna get some teeth that the community wants to have, because there seemed to be a preponderance of support to allow them in some fashion. But with the preemption, that allow them in some fashion wasn't possible.
And I did a little bit of additional research and obviously it's crystal ball research, so we don't know. But the research I did was trying to guess, is there any likelihood that the state legislature will return some degree of control to communities? And everything I've heard is absolutely not. Do not bank on that. So we are at a point that we are quite constrained by what we can do. Basically, we can either keep unenforcing the ban or we can start enforcing the ban. That's pretty much our options, unless I'm missing something.
Thank you. Who is? Okay, Ms. May?
Hi, I have the 2010 code open in front of me. Can you tell me what to click on so I can see what you're talking about? Whatever you're referring to in the 2010 code.
Well, I have to, well, it's gonna be the very bottom option, which is zoning code. And if you want us to try to pull it up on the overhead, we can try
I
to do
would
that.
love that, yeah, because I want to see, because I think that, I mean, if we have it here written, I think everybody would like to read it. And then from there, we can discuss if it was changed anywhere in 21, 13. And if that supersede or, I don't know, it's not supersede, what comes after and changes it. Supersedes, right? No, supersedes is before. I teach math. That's a lot.
And I'm making good amazing.
It's a lot of words. Okay. What chapter is it, William said?
Well, I don't remember it by off the top of my head, but I'm getting
And there's
there.
like 47 articles. Well, I mean, we knew we were gonna have to look at it. Use restrictions in single-family residential districts.
There we go.
Okay.
Chapter 23. The inclusionary as to permitted uses is there, as it is today.
Right.
It's 2301.
That's in.
Let's click that little thing. Sure, you're,
The intent of this chapter is that it is inclusionary, that is permitted uses, accessory uses, and special land uses specifically stated for each zoning districts shall be the only uses permitted. Any use proposed within any given district which is not stated use within said district is expressly prohibited. I'm not sure if it could get any more clear than that. And then later on.
Okay, so, but does it say in there that you can actually rent out your property at all?
I'm getting there, hold on.
William, could you share your screen for the people at home, please?
How do I do that?
You're pushing your luck there. But we're working on
Oh,
The rental of property, private property is governed by Florida statute. So it's not covered in the land development regulations.
So by right, if I own a property, I can rent it.
Yes. Whereas we have the power to stipulate how it can be rented and for what uses.
Where does it say 60 days?
I'm getting
Doesn't say
there.
60 days. We're not going to.
There we go.
So, and the definitions, we have a definition of what transient public lodging is. And it
Okay.
states that it's 60 days or less.
What's this? Okay, hold on, transient.
It's in definitions 23.02.03.00 general definitions, and we're in the 2010 code.
I'm in the R's.
It's
Hold
up on the screen.
Any chance you can increase the font size, zoom in a little or something?
I don't, it's in that big paragraph, transient public lodging.
Spelled out.
But this is specifically talking about hotels, motels, motor lodge.
Precisely, and then now we go to definition of what a dwelling unit is. Single-family dwelling unit, a detached building designed for or occupied exclusively by one family, but not including transient facilities nor more than one kitchen. And we also have it included in for townhouses, two-family dwelling units, and multifamily dwelling units, all specifically say not including transient facilities.
Covers all of our definitions, categories of.
Types of housing that we have, yes.
Okay, so then if, let's assume that we decide that we're going to enforce the vagueness that we're reading here. When Yolanda last Monday told us that whenever she cited a property, she gave a specific code number on the paper. What would she cite? The definition?
We'd probably be doing the inclusionary code section and the permitted use table section, because the sections are different in the 2013 code that we use now than the 2010 code. And,
But the 2013 is after the 2011 law.
correct, but as long as our laws did not change and we kept the preemption in place, then we continue to use it. And the definitions are essentially the same. We still have the same definition for transient public lodging. We still have the definitions of transient lodging is not allowed as a single family house in the code or a two-family house. And we also now have a permitted use table, which did not exist before, but it doesn't list anywhere in it vacation rentals or short-term rentals.
Okay, so in the 2013 code, if I look in zoning and I look in definitions and I read the transient one, it should say the same thing, is what you're saying?
It's essentially the same thing, yes. It has a 60-day limit.
Hold on, give me 1 sec. I want to make sure that it's all spelled out, but if you're saying that if I owned a house, I would be able to tell this, I don't know that I would. I'm a
I
pretty
know of
smart
no
person.
city in the United States that does not require a rental license to rent your house out. And that means you would call the city or the county and find out what are the rules about renting your house out.
Okay.
I remember when I bought my house, I have an ADU, and somewhere in my file is still the pink slip that said before I bought the house, is that cottage legal? And I see a lot of real estate agents listing potential ADUs when there's little property. Which I think is a mistake.
Okay, so can I ask a question to the attorney? If the code enforcement officer coded with the definition and it's an inclusive thing and all of what William just said, and the homeowner wanted to fight that and would come to the magistrate, well, where are we open for losing that fight? Do we have, I mean, where do we have a leg to stand on in that? Because I'm a little concerned that we wouldn't.
So code enforcement is an opportunity for your code to be challenged. I think, as William stated, the code officer would cite the inclusionary code and the permitted use table in the magistrate hearing. If it was, if the property owner wanted to argue it, we would argue the definitions and the prohibition. And depending on which way the magistrate ruled, the city or the property owner may want to appeal that decision to the courts, and either party is welcome to do that from any code enforcement hearing. That is one of the avenues that your regulations can make it to court, and that's not just this regulation, it's any regulation.
Sure, but my question, I guess, is as the city attorney, do you feel like we're open to being sued?
Can I ask a clarification from you? Do you mean, there's two things. Are you asking,
Well, at first I was asking if the individual homeowner that has the rental could sue, but I guess in general, could we have a class action suit by all of the STR rental owners coming to the city and saying, because I know there's other cities here that have been sued and are losing.
So any property owner who has or wants to have a short-term rental or a conglomeration of them, if they wanted to, can sue the city. What that would look like is a declaratory judgment action where they.
Wait, English?
I'm coming there.
Okay.
But that's what it's called, so where they go to the court and they say, court, I don't agree with the way that this is being interpreted by the city. Please tell them they're wrong and they need to do it a different way. So in those types of actions, there are no claims for attorney fees. And so the judge takes the argument of both sides and says either your presentation is correct or your presentation correct is somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
And so if the judge says, city, I agree with the way you have read your code, it does allow for a 60-day minimum rental, then you move forward. If the judge says, city, no, I think you got this wrong, you need to amend your code, then you amend your code. And you're basically the same place you are now. You amend your code or not, except the judge will tell you what you have to do.
Okay,
a lawsuit for damage?
I understand that, but I mean, we heard from people who were speaking that they are going to do this, and I wanted to know what kind of risk the city is under. That's all I was asking. I mean, we have to be responsible
No, of
for the
course.
city.
I just want to clarify whether your question was about people that have not, that the argument that we haven't enforced, it. That's the only one that I'm.
Oh,
concerned.
no, I wasn't. I was asking about if
If,
would a judge interpret the code as William is interpreting the code, is what I'm saying, because I have some, like the previous city attorney said that the definitions weren't enough to cite for code. I have the email that she sent that said, that's not good enough to Yolanda. You can't cite with just that. But William says you can, so I'm just trying to figure out here. It's so wishy-washy.
Reasonable minds may differ.
That's what
And
we have
that's where I'm worried about as a city, that whatever decision we make, we are gonna be liable for those decisions, and I worry about that, I mean.
But can I ask you the attorney question on it? If the legislation has said that we can't change our code, then how could a lawyer tell us, a judge tell us that we could?
No, he's not gonna be, what I'm understanding is he's not gonna tell us you can change your code to restrict it. He's gonna say your code can't restrict it.
interpretation.
And your code doesn't restrict it from how it's actually written. It's just the way you were interpreting it.
Yes, so then.
Right, so
you
that
would
it
be
was
amending-
clear.
You would be amending the code to remove the 60-day restriction. And, if there was some desire to regulate vacation rentals in some manner that doesn't include the duration or location, then you would be addressing that. And,
Right.
there are other communities who have taken those types of steps.
And it seems that obviously we would be regulating them in the same way we would regulate any other property or any other rental property with all of the codes regarding how the house has to be presented and everything else. I mean, when I knocked on the door, you could tell it was an Airbnb because it was a nice house.
Right, they're in good shape.
They're in extremely good shape. So I don't want to put the city in a position to be sued. And I think we are going to be in one if we try to enforce this rule. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Diaz.
How do I follow that up? First, I mean, I think, thank you, William, for laying out our LDRs. I mean, I think that's really important. To your point, it is difficult, right? We often use the word legalese. It's, let's be frank, it's not our LDRs, comp plans, land use law in general is generally not understandable by the vast majority of people.
Even some of the.
They should appreciate that because it's a source of our headaches, right? And so yeah, but I think our code is pretty clear. Inclusionary code has been around forever in land use law. It's, you know, William mentioned something about the modern planning code tends to kind of move away with it, which I see both sides of the argument. I mean, just like our constitution, you don't want something that's, I mean, our code's already many pages. You don't want something that's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages to absolutely cover absolutely everything possible. It's just not feasible. So I think our LDRs, they're pretty on point, and we always have, yes, we have LDRs and comp plans. Well, this specific LDR, but we've always had land use law. That's pretty much our job, right? And to sit up here and yes, we're gonna make decisions. Oftentimes we make decisions that are controversial. Sometimes we make decisions that, you know, people aren't gonna deem as popular. But if we're up here and if we're gonna not take action for fear of getting sued, then we would be paralyzed as a government. I mean, quite frankly, people want to sue us every day on every issue. That's kind of like just the nature of what we do, right? Unfortunately, I have confidence in the interpretation of the law. I think what we have is pretty clear. I'm not saying I agree with it 100%. I'll be clear on that. I think it is what it is, and we have it. I personally don't cave the pressure of being sued. A lot of people throw that accusation, that threat many times over, and it shouldn't really stop us. I mean, we know we're right. But that being said, our code, and we're stuck. I think a really good follow-up question to Commissioner McVoy's line of questioning, which really laid it out for everyone to understand why we're in this predicament. The other thing that is often brought up, well, this code hasn't been enforced in X amount of time. And if you want to be clear, what does the, case law is pretty clear that that's really not an argument. That's not a defense anywhere. We can, unfortunately, it's just how it works because of resources or however it may be. Sometimes some things don't go enforced for a certain amount of time, and that's really unfortunate. I definitely agree with that. But it's also nature of what happens. Is that correct? I mean,
That is correct.
yeah. And so, that argument doesn't stand. And what it really comes down to is on a personal level, I like Airbnb. Like a lot of people might find that surprising, but when I travel someplace and it's someplace where I need a place to stay, that's my first choice. And more specifically, I look at who the host is, and if it's someone local, if it's a family, my favorite ones, and I think we really dropped the ball on this, and we can't do it, is, the opportunity with ADUs. When it's owner occupied, those are the most ideal, those are the best places to stay, because I know my money is going to someone who's local, and I'm supporting them. Those are the best ones, but we don't have that option here, and we're stuck with this regulation that, I think is still better than the alternative. I think in this time, we should be pressuring Tallahassee to do what's right and allow us to, live in a free state of Florida where we can make our own rules, but, that's the long game. But in the meantime, I think the community desire and the need and what the data shows, it's really unfortunate. I hear the stories. I know the owner occupied ones. I know those are the ones who are going to be hurt, but realistically, it's not. There's a place for Airbnbs. Unfortunately, the law doesn't allow us to find that place in town. And the real concern is when you have LLCs who will buy like a 4-unit apartment building and turn them all into short-term rentals, or You have someone who has no connection to Lake Worth Beach, you know, maybe they live in San Francisco and they own 2 houses in Lake Worth Beach that they solely use for short-term rental. Well, you know, those are 2 units that are off market, as the housing study really pointed out, you know, that those could be long-term residents. And I think what people are commenting on when I talk to the community, there's certain things that really stand out. One thing that stands out, oh, we don't like the party houses, right? In my district, we have the birthday cake castle. That's fine. You guys are lucky you don't have that in your backyard. Let me put it that way. You know, there's definitely those properties. I recognize that's definitely not the norm on short-term rentals. I think those properties we have, you know, Yolanda and PBSO and others to handle those properties as best as we can. That's a complaint we get. Another complaint, which this tends to be tagged on to everything. We don't have enough parking for all of this stuff, and doesn't matter what the issue is, people are gonna make a comment on parking. I do agree with that, though. Some of our blocks were street parking only, and if you have a short-term rental and they have a gathering or something, then you're parking on the next block. And that's unfortunate. But really the number one comment that stands out and is the one that I think why our code right now is really the best that we have for now, is that it's this sense of place. It's this loss of community. And the number one comment that is the common denominator on people who want enforcement against short-term rentals, they say, I don't know any of my neighbors, and they cycle through and it's sketchy sometimes, and I don't feel comfortable. And it's also really sad because I live in a neighborhood that doesn't feel like a neighborhood. And then, you know, couple that on top of that, the fact that you have renters such as myself who, you know, we live on a public teacher income, a nonprofit salary, public interest salary. And, you know, to go and try and buy a house, we don't stand a chance because you need either a considerable amount of a down payment, or you need federal or state or local assistance that we don't qualify for because we're just above the threshold. Or we have to buy things in cash, which is, let me tell you, not an option for not only me, but probably a good majority of our community. And that is, I think, the top concern. We're losing our community, we're losing our neighbors because I don't even know who owns the building next to me because it's some LLC. I've never seen them around. It's a revolving door of people who punch in a code at the front door. And that is the problem. The problem is not the owner occupied, the ADLs, those things. If we could allow that tonight, I would 1000% be for that. But unfortunately, as laid out very clearly, that is not an option. And the other option of just open the floodgates and allow, you know, corporate buyouts of our housing inventory, I simply have to stand with the community and can't really allow that or support that. That's it.
I have a few thoughts, and I am so torn about this because I firmly believe that there is a place in the city for short-term rentals. They have come very, very, I had one for a few years, a couple of years ago, and it was nice as people would come and they would enjoy the city. Some of them would then come and stay here. We have essentially no other places in the city for people to stay when they come on vacation. The places are generally kept up much nicer because it is not I had a long-term tenant next door to me. I had not my tenant, but I had a neighbor, long-term tenant neighbor, and he was a nightmare. And I was like, I wish he would just move away. And the thing about the parking is, you know, you can have a single family house owner occupied with a family that has 3 teenagers and everybody's got a car. You know, so that's really not the be all and end all thing. So I'm very torn. I believe that we do have the 60 days. I believe that it would stand up. And if the courts in a deck action said, no, it's not like a giant lawsuit of money. But I really am my heart is broken because I do believe we have a place for them. if the I'm on the committee, the land use and code enforcement committee for the state legislature for Florida League, and this comes up all the time. It's like, and they do Tallahassee has a death hold on us with this, and they won't let go. It comes up at our meeting every year. Can't we let them relax this a little bit, give us home rule, which Tallahassee is not very favorable these days. So I don't think this legislature is going to change it. We're stuck with this situation. So the lawyer part of me says if we have this ordinance, and even though we've never enforced it, we're gonna start enforcing it, and, you know, legally, the challenge will be you never enforced it, and now you are, but that's a losing argument, and the other one is, it's hard to read the ordinance, well, I'm sorry. The only easy ordinances are criminal ordinances, or criminal statutes. Right, it's so easy. So, I hate it. I hate it because I feel like in terms of the city and enforcing codes, we can't just say, don't enforce a code, which has apparently been what's been said for the past 20 years. On the other hand, I think we should have to have that code. So I don't know what to do. I would be interested, just not tonight, not as a pop quiz, but to the question of can we restrict home ownership, you know, to individuals and not LLCs? I think we can't. I think you can probably answer that question.
Florida is a very pro-property rights state. You do have the ability, and even if you're a foreign corporation or company, limited liability company, and you purchase property in the state of Florida and you have no other operations in the state of Florida, you have the powers to buy and sell and transfer and lease, you know, your real property. That's part of your powers as a corporation or business entity in Florida. So I suspect no.
The short answer is no.
But I will look just in case.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine that we would because of property rights and stuff. One thing I do want to say though is, you know, when we do enforce this 60-day limit, I don't think anybody should be under the delusion that they're going to be affordable rentals. They will be available long-term rentals, but they're not going to say, oh, I don't need to make as much money now because the profit rate is a little bit higher with an Airbnb. If you're filled all the time, you can make a little more money than a long-term rental. It's also much more work than a long-term rental, I'm here to tell you. But I don't think we should think that there's going to be we're going to help the affordable housing market if we do this. And we do have, as far, and Ronaldo, you pointed out when we first started talking about this last year, in terms of the Airbnbs, the problems that we have, and you made a point, you know, if it's noise, if it's a party, if it's drugs, if you know, we have ways to enforce that, which we still do have ways to enforce. So, I mean, I'm just really, this is not an easy situation because I want to vote no, I don't want to vote no, we shouldn't enforce it. Because we have an ordinance, and unless we change the ordinance, we should enforce it. But on the other hand, I think it's unfortunate because we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's a room, I believe there's space in our city for Airbnbs. Now, one thing I also want to bring up, when we talked about, and I asked you about, you know, the memo that you put out in terms of due process, you know, people are using them as Airbnbs at this point. And what you pointed out to me was that if however they're identified, that you would send out a courtesy notice of 90 days to stop. And after 90, correct me if I'm wrong, after 90 days, it would then become a code case with another 90 days to comply. And then more than likely, the special magistrate would give them another 90 days to come into compliance without a fine. So that's 270 days. So it does give people a lot of time to make an arrangement to have it a long, because it's, again, we're not forcing people out because these are short-term rentals. It's not like there's a lease that anybody would have to break. I mean, I think it does give a long time to make the transition, which I've done, and it's fine. So, I mean, I think I'm forced to vote to enforce it, although my heart is not in it.
And just so people aren't surprised, based on the time frame, if you were to choose to enforce what we have on the books today, Yolanda's team and I would get together, and we probably would not get out the
Right.
first notices, because where we're falling in, and we try to be as compassionate as we can with co-compliance, is that we would want to reaffirm all the research that we have and send out the notice. It's probably, the notices are probably not going to go out until probably January.
Right.
Because I don't want to send them in, and I don't want to put Yolanda and her team in the predicament where we have these courtesy notices being sent out during Thanksgiving. How nasty is that?
Thank you.
So that's already giving people, you know,
Another
you've got
60
October,
days.
November, December, that's a
So it's
90
been a
day,
year
it
before
would
it
be a
actually come into
year
effect.
from now before a fine would start.
Right. What was I gonna ask, one more question? While you were talking, another question came up, which is gone now, but I'll break it.
Madam Mayor, while you're thinking of your question,
Sure.
have a minute and 50 seconds left of the discussion.
I haven't even had a bite of the apple yet.
We extended, I think.
Yeah.
No, then it goes to work.
Yeah, we can go to extend the year
I move that we allow the discussion to continue. with the appropriate
till 10
extension.
o'clock.
I know, I second. We're not talking about the time, we're talking about the half hour that we have for
Oh,
discussion.
before
People
it comes to
moving to
workshop. Got it.
increase that time.
Okay.
I'm seconding that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. I still haven't told, thank you for trying, Madam Clerk, but it still hasn't come to me. I think Ms. Malek was next.
Thank you. I wish we were talking about slumlords and LLCs and we spent this much time on them because they're the biggest problem in our city. And everybody, I mean, I love Airbnbs. I use them. I use hotels. I don't understand why we can't put a moratorium when this city put a moratorium on sober houses. And that's a residential home and now it's protected by ADA. So I'm frustrated. I don't think the Airbnbs are a problem. It's not gonna solve the housing crisis. I think they're fulfilling a need that we have in our city right now. I hear people's concerns about 60 days, enforce it or don't enforce it. Whatever the dais decides tonight, I would urge us to have a presentation, and I've shared this with Jamie. There are companies out there that regulate Airbnbs and do the governance and the babysitting, if you will, for the cities. And I met this person from Decker Technologies at the National League of Cities at their little conference hall. And just out of nowhere, she gave a presentation. She did her own research. I told her where we were, what city we were having this conversation. And they address identification, compliance monitoring, and rental activity reporting, identify the properties, the addresses, the property owner address, real-time reporting of all new listings and their daily calendar monitoring. They scrub 10,000 plus websites, monitor daily. They can upload all of our code. They will notify our code department when somebody's in violation. Jamie said that we probably have to go out to bid because it's $16,000 for a year, which is half the price, less than code. And they find the code violators. They did the research though, and in less than 2.5 years, short-term rentals in our zip codes on what they calculated was over $5 million in revenue. So that's not even the money that's trickled down to our businesses that are obviously suffering. And businesses equals jobs. And the economy is just, it's a full circle, right? And to me, short-term rentals in our little city, I actually think that it adds to the fabric and to the charm. I would rather have a short-term rental next to me. I actually have one across the street from me. The guy who owns it has one of those big RVs that looks like he's getting ready for doomsday. And I know when he's in town because it's parked out front. So he uses it when he's not out in his RV, otherwise he rents it. I am not opposed to them. I am not gonna support the enforcement of the 60-day. I'm not opposed to them. I don't think that this is not the problem in our city. The problem are the LLCs who are slumlords, who have 15 people living in a house and who are collecting rent and who are adding to the blight of our city. Short-term rentals is not our concern.
So are you suggesting that you would make a motion to have a moratorium on the enforcement?
Well, no, Ms. Elizabeth says that we can't put a moratorium on short-term rentals.
On any enforcement of any ordinance?
Before we even went to a motion, I have a legal clarifying question.
But my bigger thing is the consensus of if we're gonna do, if this is what the diet says, we're gonna enforce 60 days and we're gonna give 275 days for people to get ready, then I would urge us to have somebody come in and do a presentation and go out to bid and have a third party do the regulation, do the babysitting. We're trying to get our code compartment, we have a code officer who does that.
Babysitting company didn't have SDRs.
No, I'm saying if we enforce the 60 days,
Then we won't have SDRs, we don't need. to do
they're
those
still
things.
technically short-term rentals because they're 60 days. It's not a full-time, long-time rental. I mean, there are nurses that are at JFK Hospital who are here for less than 6 months and they do those kind of rentals. There are people who are traveling, salespeople that are here for a couple weeks. Short-term rentals are just not partiers. They're not tourists. They're people who, that come into town and they're looking for that right place to buy. Or they're business owners who are thinking about investing here. There's multiple reasons why, so I'm not in favor of enforcing, I'm okay with letting it be where it is right now. I have a saying that I won't say on the dais because I'll get in trouble, but
Don't get in trouble.
not gonna get in trouble. I would just like us, if we're going to enforce it, be thoughtful that our staff is already inundated. We're trying to do clean and green. We're trying to really focus on cleaning up our city. And for a small investment, we can help staff facilitate the implementation of 60 days, if that's the way the diet goes.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the legal concern. If we, because it's a valid concern, we don't want to walk into a buzzsaw that we know is, we're gonna get sued. Whether we get sued or not, I don't think it's a big issue. It's what is the likelihood of that prevailing? And what are the costs to us of that happening and what are the remedies at that point? What I'm interested in is, as our attorney, where do you see, if anywhere, or do you not see, weaknesses that expose us to a lawsuit? What? Well, this is all black, no.
On their own. Don't help them sue us for crying out loud.
Can you,
Get that one-on-one.
can you let me finish without interrupting, please? All this stuff is written black and white. Our code, there's no secrets in it. It's right there. I, as a non-attorney, I read that and it says this is an inclusionary code. If it's included, you can do it. If it's not, you cannot. I don't see much black and white for somebody to interpret. Well, that's not very clear. It seems pretty clear, but maybe I'm missing something. The definitions, you got to work at it a little bit. You got to go from this definition to that definition, link them together, but it's not, impossible. Where do you see, if anywhere, any weaknesses that would suggest that if we were to get sued, we would lose?
A judge having a bad day.
Well, okay, fair enough.
Seriously.
Fair enough.
Yeah, had a fight with his wife. So it's your parties.
So,
Right.
somebody banned their Airbnb, I know you teach math, I read contracts, I don't do litigation, we have other people in our firm who do litigation. So I don't feel like I can really answer that specific question. I can tell you that if you do get sued, that there is a chance you will win and there is a chance you will lose. And I think that in any litigation, no matter what the facts, there is always a chance. Because you never know how a judge will see the issue. And, that said, I think the type of action that would come from this is a low risk to the city. Because it's really a whether or not you have read your code the way that it should be read. And so your options are continue going on the way you've always done, because you've got it right. Or you've got it wrong and you need to do something, which would be either amend your code to take those provisions out, or amend your code to regulate vacation rentals in some way that you possibly legally could, given the preemptions.
So I think, and I respect that you do contracts and not litigation, and, I get that there's different flavors of law and all that stuff. But I think what I'm hearing is the risk is pretty small and the relief would not be the end of the world if we had to do so. So to me, that comes off the table as a deciding factor in our decision. And so for me, I hear very much, Mayor, where you are, that torn. I, like Commissioner Diaz, I've stayed in Airbnbs in various parts of the world, in some other parts of Florida. And I love the original concept. Somebody mentioned in their comments that the original concept was you own a house, you rent out a room because, you know, the kids have left and gone to college or whatever it is, you've got some spare place, you rent it out, you meet interesting people who come in and out, and it's a pretty low impact on the community. It's not turning over the whole building. It's not bought by an investor. All of those things, and it's an interesting interaction. You do get to meet people in the community as a guest, and you get to know people from far away as a host. All of that is pretty cool, and it has some supplemental income. It sounds like, and that was a learning moment for me, it sounds like if you're doing owner occupied, renting a room, you're okay. You can continue doing that here. And so a big chunk of what people like about the original concept is, in fact, whatever we decide here, still available. Carry on. So that's a relief. That's a big relief to me. That does allow some of the most positive aspects of this to, there's no problem. To me, it comes back down to, we have rules on our books that appear to be pretty clear. And we have a choice. Do we want to be a community that enforces those for the reasons, I think the ones that Commissioner Diaz referred to, that and it came up in a lot of the comments that people do not feel like this enhances their sense of community, and it feels like it's eroded it. I agree with the mayor that would enforcing this and not allow them to fix all of our affordable housing? No, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. Would it have an influence on prices? Probably. Is the influence noticeable? Is it sizable? I'm skeptical on that. Does it have an influence on the flavor of the community, especially if you're on a block that's already got 3 of them? You might get 4 or 5 of them. Yes, it definitely has an influence on our community. And I've heard over the years from a lot of people who are really unhappy about that. If we had a way to regulate, control the area, control the density, I think we'd all be in favor of that. We don't have that option. It's either enforce what we have or don't enforce what we have. That, unless I've missed something, that's pretty much where we are.
Can we vote not to enforce something, attorney, whoever you are? You got the job.
Yes, that is a policy decision that you can make.
Because I'm gonna say, I mean, you know, the flavor of, I get, you know, the argument of the flavor of the neighborhood, but I gotta tell you, on my street, there's one, I mean, a lot of my neighbors don't speak English, so it's hard to, you know, communicate with them. But it's not like the old days where you go next door and you borrow a cup of sugar, the way you're thinking of this traditional neighborhood. Not, I mean, some areas are probably, in the city are probably more like that. I live downtown. So I just don't know.
I mean, I'm hearing all of the arguments, and I do understand the idea of the neighborhood. I have an Airbnb right next door to me, and, I mean, we have a key to the house. The guy that owns it is a nice guy. He comes down with his family, and when he's not there, it's an Airbnb. And if the people that are renting it are annoying, they're gone in 3 days. Right. Doesn't matter. So, I mean, but that's anecdotal. And I think that, you know, we heard a lot of anecdotes tonight. We heard anecdotes about why people don't like them. We heard anecdotes about why people do like them. And I think that, you know, I ran on, if we have a code, we need to enforce it. And so I don't think that just the 5 of us up here kicking the can and saying, we're going to keep it, but we're not going to enforce it. That's not a rule. And so for me, I think I would like to have the 60 days removed, change the code so that the Airbnbs may rent theirs as they would, in any other city that allows Airbnbs. I think that we have, first of all, there's only 400 of them. And if all of a sudden they all went up for sale, it's not doing anything for our affordable housing. That's not gonna change. Then it's, at this point, it's the only place where you can stay when you come visit this city. That's the, unless you wanna stay on Dixie with these. Okay, so, okay, you have a couple Airbnb, you have a couple bed and breakfasts, but, I think that if the community really wanted this ban, we would have enforced it years and years and years ago. I think the reason we keep kicking it is because nobody has the guts to say Airbnbs are not the end of the world. They are not gonna kill our city. We are a tourist town. We live in Palm Beach County on the ocean. People are gonna come visit. That's just the nature of where we live. If we don't wanna have visitors come, go live in, I don't know, Wyoming. And then go get your sugar from your neighbor. And Wayne, you don't live very far. I will loan you some sugar. You know, and I don't think it does change it. I think we have neighborhood associations. We have great neighborhoods. We have a great sense of community in this city. And we have Airbnbs. Let's not forget the fact that we have them. What's gonna change between us changing that rule and tomorrow is nothing. Nothing. So I think that we have to think about the fact that it's expensive to own a house here. And statistically, 67% of the Airbnb owners in Palm Beach County have them because they can't afford their primary residence. So we may be inadvertently, I'm assuming, kicking out many of our residents who can't afford to live here without having these properties as rental properties, whether they are in their home or they are down the street. So I understand what Vice Mayor Maliga is saying about the LLCs. That's a conversation for another day because that doesn't have anything to do with Airbnbs. They might have some Airbnbs, but they're also rentals. They're also just sitting there on these properties, you know, doing nothing with them, but letting them turn to blight. So I'm gonna make a motion that we instruct staff to come back with some of the ways that we could work with the Airbnb owners, because I know that those discussions have happened. Ways that we can legally, in conjunction with the owners, have a successful Airbnb program within the city of Lake Worth Beach without having the 60-day ban. That is my motion. That you come back with some sort of an effective solution that doesn't ban where they are, doesn't ban how many they are. It follows the state law, and it follows our laws, and it allows, honestly, I think that that's too much to put in code. We're basically saying we haven't enforced this in forever, but you guys figure out how to do it. And I don't think that's fair. We have enough stuff for them to work on when it comes to just cleaning up the city. So I made my motion.
I second that motion.
Okay, sorry, I got excited.
That's okay, no good, we love MASH. And there's a way to do that, there's a way to come back to it.
Oh, yeah.
You had it in the backup.
And we may even, there'll be some options for you, because there's multiple parts of the code that could change, but the LDRs would be chapter 23, removing the transient lodging prohibition on the various residential sections. That's just changing the definitions. And I can get with Elizabeth on how we deal with the rest of it. We probably would want to add, just for clarity's sake, a short-term vacation rental section to our permitted use table. That's not that difficult. Some of the other nuances when it comes to what was in the white paper about, that's your discretion. Are we going to require that vacation rentals not be homestead exempted? That might be a decision made by the property appraiser's office.
But I think that when, and we can come back and discuss that, but if somebody is a homestead, all that says is they live here 6 months and 1 day. It doesn't say that they can't rent it out for the other 5 months and 29 days.
Correct. But the property appraiser's office is getting pretty.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, if we can do it, fine. I'm just,
There's,
think
there's a
that's a
couple
good
other
idea.
ones that, may not be as, easy to deal with, but we can
Let's
bring you
make
back.
them practical and easily
We can
enforceable.
bring you some of the things that have been adopted by some other cities like Point Beach, Orlando, Wellington, that, have helped make them not be a nuisance.
Breckenridge.
And also, I mean,
That's in Colorado, so we can only do what we allow to do in state of
talking about the
Florida.
West End.
Ideas.
I mean, my house, for example, I have my giant house in the front. And then I have a
giant?
It's late, I'm exaggerating. Okay, it's under 1,000 square feet. Okay, and I have AGB. So with the property, when I bought my house, they called me, I talked to them and there's two structures and they said, well, and I said, well, no, I want to rent one out. So I'm homesteaded on my home. But the ADU in the back is I'm not under homestead, so.
And that's an easier one, but they're becoming more, inquisitive about those who live here 6 months in a day. And
Oh.
maintaining their homestead exemptions.
No, I mean, I think that's the homestead exemption.
Okay, we have a motion, second, okay, just so the motion, wait, we have.
Before we vote, I need a legal clarification. Is your motion proposing to do something that would remove our current grandfathered status?
Yes.
Yes,
We go back and
We
now
can
we
never go
call-
back.
we can never go back unless there's some kind of state change at the stat, unless Tallahassee.
No, we can't go
You
back.
can't. No, this is,
If we got rid of 60 days, we can't go back and say, oh, we want our
Right.
60 days back.
we then fall completely under the state's view of preemption.
Precisely.
Right.
Be very.
Or
careful.
we trust the fact that this is not the end of the world.
I mean, the market is not, I mean, I follow it a little bit, the market is cooling off.
It's very much going on.
It really is, and the pandemic's over, I did Airbnbs, then I did the nursing, traveling nurses. And they were usually, 60 days, 80, 3 months, 4 months.
Yeah. I get the construction workers next door.
There you go. If so, okay.
I think Mr. Diaz has a
Well, I know
question.
we also have a motion and second.
Yeah, I just have one question.
So does anyone call a question or do you want to just keep chatting?
No, you call a question.
Okay, somebody can do that.
I mean, unless they have something.
Do something you want to add this question?
No, I mean, if your previous comment is you were concerned about the liability of us getting dragged into court, I mean, you should consider the risk of undoing this 60-day rule. Then you're effectively saying, well, we're potentially opening up the floodgates because anything else we could propose in the future in terms of what you're deeming as like a reasonable regulation, which I fully wish we could do, but I think that could be interpreted as a new regulation. And I
The
think,
only- The state said you can regulate is where and how many.
right. And you're proposing to undo the 60-day thing, because we also can't regulate duration, right? And, in a perfect world, it would operate like any other land use code where we say short-term rentals, there's a place in our community and they're appropriate here in this zone, whatever, and we can't do that. And undoing the 60-day rule is letting go of the last semblance of control and regulation that we have right now. And that to me is the risk.
Which we've never enforced in all these years. It's never been enforced.
So
Not that we could never.
We
chose not.
And if
That's
I
different.
may, if I can finish my comment at least. Again, that's never an argument, and I think that, like, never, we haven't enforced it because as Mr. Waters pointed out, well, we've been waiting for the longest time for Tallahassee to do like literally anything. Like most other issues, and that just doesn't happen ever in our favor. And so that's been the postponement up to this point. And to sit here and keep talking about and kicking the can down the road, let's do this. We know we can pretty much bet on what's gonna happen if we undo the 60-day rule and we try to add in other rules. I think the better and more appropriate mechanism is maintain the enforcement of that, because as it was clarified by Mr. Waters, the owner occupied, the people who live in the house and do it, there's still opportunities with that to protect that. Those are the ones that it seems like we agree, those are the better choice. It's not the LLCs and the the out-of-towners or whoever that owns multitudes of properties. Those are the ones that people are complaining about. Those are the ones that our neighbors are saying, I feel like I don't live in a proper neighborhood because I don't know my neighbors because it's a revolving door. Those are the ones that we're concerned about. If we undo the 60-day rule, then we might as well just throw in the towel and say allow it. So, you know, we can vote on that motion. I have my own motion to make. But I do think there's room, hopefully, to push boundaries and to find something that we can do, but I'm not here willing to let go of the rule that we have. And this argument that, well, it's never been enforced before, or there isn't absolute, you know, it's not gonna be foolproof, we're not gonna stop them, or that it doesn't have an effect on the housing market. That is not true, because if we put all these units out, if they all go out for rent, for long-term rent tomorrow, that for sure is gonna have an effect on price. Only 400, that's a considerable amount of units that could be added back to inventory for long-term renters. And that for sure would have some sort of effect on price. Are they all gonna be affordable? Of course not. Most of these Airbnbs are definitely in, like, you know, neighborhoods where, let's be real, it's not what we would deem affordable. And that's okay. I think there's a market for that, and I think they're gonna do A-okay with that. So that, you know, I don't fall for that argument. I don't like that, well, it hasn't been enforced before, because the courts are very clear that is not a solid defense to anything. And then the other thing of, what was the other one? And, you know, it's just what it comes down to. It's protecting the nature and the character of our community. And right now, there's a very strong desire of people wanting to know their neighbor, wanting to push back against the LLCs, the out-of-state investors, because that's what's driving up the prices. I mean, for you to say that the housing is cooling off, yeah, it is. And believe me, I know, because we're looking, and we went through the first-time home buyers program. We're doing all the things, trying to do the best that we can so that we could afford a place for, you know, us and our 14-month-old. And realistically, I cannot compete against people who are coming in and saying, here's 400,000 cash.
You can't regulate that anyway.
Well, we're not regulating that, but the 60-day rule, you're saying that our 60-day rule has no impact on housing inventory. That's just not true. If we enforce it, those units will become available for long-term renters, or if they choose to sell. That does have an indirect impact on prices. I mean, last time I checked, we want to believe that this country still has a free market, and, you know, that demand, those prices, that's what drives the prices. They could also all collectively have a meeting and say, we're gonna sell all our houses at 40% over market value, and that'll really have an effect. They could do that too.
They can do it now.
They can do it now.
It's happening anyway.
But to say that, you know, there's really nothing we can do and we're not gonna solve this problem with this rule, so we might as well give up on it, that's just not a great argument. I mean, in any law, absolute prohibition is never a justification, right? Like, we'll never stop people from committing DUI, but that's still a law, because we need that law to enforce it, right? And obviously, these aren't like life and death rules, and we're talking about land use code, but we're still in a way talking about people's living, their sense of place, their community, and just their ability to live in their community and live comfortably without having to absolutely struggle every month.
May I ask what you said you were gonna make a motion, but you didn't say what it was.
I would
have a
move-
Pending motion out there.
Yeah,
I would just like to.
that's a little gray area. I wouldn't, yeah.
A comment that has been made repeatedly is we don't have any place for people to stay. I have a real problem that we put enormous energy into the Gulf Stream. We subsidize the Gulf Stream between the city and the CRA. For us to say, well, we don't have any place for people to stay, we're getting the Gulf Stream. That was the argument that was made. We need a place, so we're getting there. It's a little bit disingenuous. We had a meeting to talk about ADUs, and we said, oh, we can't possibly have ADUs because we have to protect the single-family residential neighborhoods.
I'm all for it.
Well, we're talking
We
very
cut
much
them out
out of both
single
sides of our mouth here, and this is an opportunity to make a decision to enforce clear rules that we've had for a long time, that there are reasonable reasons we haven't enforced them. And we clearly have been asked to listen to our residents And a lot of residents over the years and including today have said very clearly, they don't agree necessarily. You may like construction workers coming and going next to you. Most people are not crazy about the turnover. They would like to have a neighbor who lives there. And the concerns that Commissioner Diaz has mentioned about you take away our 60 days. We have just wiped out the last thing that we have. And we've gotten clear indication from Tallahassee, and anybody knows anything about Tallahassee, don't look to them to ever give you. And a piece that you need to remember, that number of 67% that you have, you know full well where it came from. It came from the lobbyists for Airbnb. If you do a little bit looking at why we will never get a reasonable rule out of Tallahassee, it's because the Airbnb, all those lobbyist folks that we had in here, Airbnb subsidized them very heavily.
We know that that's not gonna happen.
So it's not gonna happen. So let's not give up our one piece of control over this that we have. We still have the ability for people to do what most people have. You can supplement your income, renting out to a guest, a room in your house, you probably even rent 2 rooms in your house if you wanted, and still be legal. And still supplement your income and not have, and you're owner occupied, you're there, you can be homeless, all those things.
So I have a question for legal. If we vote on this motion, that's not saying as of right now, we want to get rid of the 60 days. We're saying staff bring us something back as a meeting of the minds, correct?
I was actually gonna make a comment to
Oh,
that
thank
fact. So great question. So yes, tonight, what your motion is to give staff direction to bring something back.
Not to abolish.
That something back will be a change to your land development code. That will go to both of your advisory boards who sit as your joint LPA. And then would come to you for 2 hearings or 2 readings before anything would be passed.
It'll be 2 hearings that involve the permitted use table.
Yeah, so there is a lot that will happen between now and anything actually changing. And so yes, there is time and lots of steps.
But would there be the opportunity if,
You can change your minds
can't show
anytime between now and.
It's not
final
there to
vote.
wake up tomorrow
We
morning.
could wait for staff to bring it back and say, you know what, we don't like any of those decisions. We want to keep it the 60 days.
Correct.
Right.
Okay,
but
that's what I
don't
thought.
like to have laws in the book that we don't enforce.
I agree, but the rhetoric just made it sound like
Even Mr.
as of right now, we're getting rid of the 60 days and that's not what we're doing.
No, you're absolutely right. We've just, my motion was to instruct staff to come back with some direction
Some ideas.
on what we could do in order to move forward with
We'll
this.
come back with some policy based on your direction.
Policy based on our direction,
Is
but we
this
want it to
their
be
policy?
that we can enforce whatever we have on the book, we need to be able to enforce.
But you specifically said to get rid of the 60 days. You specifically said that in your motion.
If they change the LDRs, it will get rid of the 60 days,
If we agree.
if we agree to it.
This
What
is
you're
just for
asking-
staff to bring us ideas.
Okay.
I
Well, then-
understand that, I
okay.
understand what I'm saying.
Bring your voice down.
Okay, you don't have to vote for it, you don't have to agree with me, I know what I'm saying.
Well, this is very important clarification because we may agree on it is when you made your motion, you said to come back, but doing away with the 60-day thing. If I were to hypothetically make a motion instead, I would say start enforcement, maintain a 60-day, and let's come back and see what flexibility and what changes we can do. What I was saying, because
I see what you're saying.
impression
No.
was you were saying, let's do away with the 60-day.
Yes, I am, I'm saying that we allow rentals less than 60 days. I am saying that,
Oh, okay.
yes, I am saying that.
So that would be removing our grandfather. Now, it
Okay, all right,
sounds like,
so, but,
And
even if she says that, it's not gonna happen until we vote on it because it has to
Right.
go through everybody else.
Right, and but this is the motion that I'm making, would include having rentals less than 60 days.
Well, now we're confused.
No, I was gonna say now, I'm more.
Okay, well, I can try to help. Commissioner, I think I'm make a motion for staff to bring about the necessary LDR and other ordinance changes to facilitate the removal of the 60-day prohibition of leases for short-term rentals.
Now,
As
are we-
well as the provisions to be put in place with, that we would work with having the license, all the things that you put in the list. Having the license, having the inspections, all that stuff.
Okay.
And you don't want enforcement to start.
Well,
If
enforcement
nothing
can
can start until we
nothing's
make
gonna happen.
a law.
Right now.
I mean, if we say tonight, start enforcing, that means a courtesy letter goes out. 90 days, 90 days, 90 days, there's plenty of time for us to come back. If we come, now, my one concern about this, because I mean, obviously, this is a hard decision, this is
It's
one of the
very hard.
hardest things we have to deal with. Is that a huge amount of work for staff to do, to look at the LDRs and to, you know, meet with us and talk about it and make changes? It's fine, he's fine, friend.
We are, we're taking care of some other business that we need to consider.
Right.
We likely will not get any LDR changes formally before you until based on where January, our first and second reading.
Okay.
The courtesy notices I mentioned maybe half an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, we're not gonna go out until January.
Right.
So there is a preponderance of work that will be done by staff in preparation for those courtesy notices. We also have some that are sitting there waiting for some direction from you all that have been to the magistrate that we either throw out altogether because now we're moving in a different direction than what was the thought being when they were cited, some of them as many
So
as
they're already
5.
cited as Airbnb? I mean, their citation, the folks have been cited?
Yeah, we had some that were cited as short-term rentals, but then when they told us to put a stay on it,
You did.
we just have the
So they're
spreadsheet.
not on the train to the general magistrate.
Can't do it. We
Okay,
couldn't do
no. And so there's a little bit of like confusion there, which will not be cleared up until you provide a definitive decision. Yes, we're gonna change the ordinances and have this, or we're gonna keep the ordinances the way they are and we're gonna enforce them. So
So it's a different perspective, and I think that if we have your sort of motion, whatever that motion is, it gives us time to reflect a little bit and kind of think about it and talk to our lawyers.
And to hear from our constituents.
Right, right.
As well.
But it starts the train on something that we have repeatedly says we do not want to give staff extra work on things that don't make.
The work's done, they gave us a list
Don't have
already.
They pretty much,
We've already
Yeah,
gotten it.
enforcing 60 days without a plan on how to enforce the 60 days. You can't knock on a door unless we hire a third party who does this and watches the calendars. We can't have Yolanda's team knocking on the door and go, have you been here for 61 days? I mean,
the
there's no.
enforcement, the actual enforcement, that's been my underlying question.
That's,
How do you actually enforce it? Because you can't enforce based on an advertisement alone. You know that. You have to prove that it's happened. So, all right, what's your motion? What's your motion?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
can I iterate the motion that I heard?
Sure.
That would be
That'd be
And
great.
we can go from there?
Yes.
please.
So the motion is instructing staff to bring back options for a successful short-term rental program based on the commission's direction.
No, it has to, the motion has to include removal of the 60 days.
I'm sorry, Commissioner McVoy, I'm just reading back what I typed that Commissioner May said.
Okay, but she later
So if
said,
that's not correct, if you want to amend it,
Can you read
take
it
it
one
back
more
and
time, Melissa?
redo it.
one more time.
Instructing staff to bring back options for a successful short-term rental program. And then you added on based on commission's direction.
And then you added on eliminating the 60 days. I think.
But if you kept it to bringing back options, then you could decide what you want before they write up an ordinance that may not pass.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to have something come back with some options, but I do think that if we change the LDRs, it's going to get rid of the 60 days. So pretty much I'm asking if you change, if we're gonna change LDRs, then it's going to change it. I mean, I think that we run I think that it will change the 60 days, and that's kind of what I want you to bring back.
So I think your motion needs to be clear.
So the motion would be for staff to bring back a proposal or can you read it, Melissa, and just add the 60-day part to it?
Yes. Instructing staff to bring back options for a successful short-term rental program
Without restrictions on stay time.
Okay, without, on longevity of stay or something like that.
Correct.
Without restrictions related to length of stay.
Length of stay. And then, I mean, we'll bring it, I mean.
We're confirming, but what was your question?
Hi. I don't have a question.
Oh, okay.
Oh, they were ready to answer it.
I didn't have one. But it doesn't matter.
We're bringing up answers.
Nobody else wants to go.
Well, what do you have to say?
Under planning law, if you're dealing with uses or changes, there is things such as called a zoning in progress.
Mhm.
And
Right.
if it had been publicly advertised, there's a change in your code, it does facilitate making use of that change until you finally make a decision. And it can lead to grandfathered uses if, say that the proposed change, someone takes advantage of it and it doesn't pass on second reading before the ordinance. You could, in theory, end up with some non-conforming uses or non-conforming lots or whatever. And I was just asking the city attorney, how would a zoning in progress interpretation affect this if we move forward with advertising or making changes to the LVRs, which will move the 60-day prohibition for single family, two-family, and multifamily dwelling units, and it doesn't pass at second, and we maintain the status quo. In theory, there could be some vacation rentals that could possibly apply and be considered from them forward non-conforming uses.
Grandfathered in,
Wait,
the
you
ones
can-
that are here now.
so you're saying that you could, they would follow a law that we didn't make yet?
I think.
This is where she and I.
So oftentimes when you see the zoning in progress, you're moving from something that is broad to something more narrow. And so the more broad thing that's already allowed, people can do before you make it more narrow.
But we're making it less.
So here you'd be making it less narrow, so the more narrow regulation that's already in place would still prevail until you broaden it.
Okay, so there would be no zoning in progress risk.
That's my interpretation.
Okay, so if we.
We would look at it, of course.
We need to look at it.
Okay, I don't wanna,
So we would declare a zoning in progress.
Well,
Yeah.
by default, a zoning in progress is declared once a public hearing is scheduled before the first LPA, which would be the Planning and Zoning Board, then the Historic Resource Preservation Board. I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna put our heads around all that you've recommended from your suggestion,
Mhm.
and then send you back a legal brief before we bring it all forward to an advisory board. So you can-
assuming my
Can you do
motion
that on
passes.
Yeah, so your motion passes.
And you all can also, we can bring some policy direction that gives more specifics of what you want to see in an ordinance before we bring it, before we draft an ordinance and bring it to your advisory boards too. That is an option that you all have done use before as
I
well.
just want our code to be enforceable.
So your.
We're doing
So
nothing.
taking away 50 days.
Yes.
Lovely.
To maintain borders.
Okay, we're talking about this for a very long time. I think we all have our positions, you know, we all.
So call the question.
Yes, can I just ask a quick question about transient housing for legal? I'm not a lawyer, so I have to ask a question. Transient housing. Does that include? Burkle Place? Adopt a family? Because I'm reading the code, I'm reading what the definition is, and in my world, those places would fall under transient housing. So how are an Airbnb subjected to 60 days minimum, but we don't put those same constraints on other entities within our city, and we have a lot of them. I need this this is for my own information.
That's a conversation that will probably take another like
Right.
5-hour meeting. Because those, it's the things you're talking about don't fall under the use category as state stipulates as transient housing. Because and though you said it, we have never allowed and do not allow sober homes. What has been, I'll just give you this, we have had entities rent a building or buy a building and allow people to come in and out of it as transient. they're not charged. There's no check-in, check-out, except through like, and only one I can use is the one we had the most complaints about, is Goodwill Industries rented a whole apartment complex. They had a legal valid year lease with the owner. And how they move people in and out was all under the radar.
That's not considered transient, and we
No.
can't enforce it.
Yeah, but that would be like me renting Betty's house and running it as an Airbnb.
You wouldn't want to.
I know, but I could, but based on what you just said. Because I have a year-long lease with Betty. What I do with that property is on me.
It's, if you're renting it and you're just letting people use it, you're not re-renting.
So there's no exchange of money.
Halfway houses, people pay to stay in those houses.
So there are lots of different types of housing, and some of them have come forward and requested reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act to allow for shorter term stays, and you have to, if that's a reasonable accommodation,
I
for
get
your
it.
disability, you have to allow.
Okay.
Purple house or.
I have more questions, I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Diaz, one quick question and then we're gonna go.
It's more of a statement about the zoning in progress. It's quick. I have very strong concerns about that because I think our esteemed policymakers and the people who are deciding on, whether or not they're gonna give us funding for a legislative ask, they might interpret that as an attempt to force in a regulation. And I have, they have been reactionary in the past. And I'd be really concerned about using that tactic.
I don't understand.
So what was proposed of, if we did a zoning in progress, and it would give us kind of a window to allow potential control, if you will, and then if it fails in the end, that those applications in that process can continue on as if it was valid. That's the interpretation, right? And so my concern is if we tried to do that and it resulted in a little bit of what can be construed as control or regulation of short-term rentals in town. My concern is that legislators might, take some retribution and deny us all our funding requests. Because
It would be seen as a runaround of their
Of their rule.
preemption of our.
But we wouldn't be doing anything that they've preempted. We can't, we know that. We know what we're allowed to do.
It certainly sets up potentially a very,
It's a gray area.
a
and
very
it's-
gray area that you have some, short-term rentals
And
that
we're
are
actually
locked.
going in their direction because they don't want us to regulate them. They've said you can't regulate them. So if we're taking away regulation, they would not.
I don't think it would be good favor. I think we want to be very careful going in direction that gets sort of the 60-day that we have. And that's legal. I think we should think about hearing what the other motion is, which says, okay, let's enforce it. But let's look at what other things we can do to, make sure that. we're-
So I wish that you would call the question on my motion. If it fails, it fails, but let's vote.
Based on this circuitous conversation and it being this late, would you like us to bring back some ideas that we can discuss in a workshop? And you don't have to, and you don't have to take a vote.
See our enthusiasm?
I'm just like, because we're going around about this for over an hour, and if it makes you feel more comfortable
going
not to
around
take a vote, we can bring back the options of what it would take to do that, and we can discuss them in the workshop, and it doesn't necessitate you're taking a vote tonight.
Okay.
Okay,
I mean, I don't want that to be seen as kick in the can, but I think more educated is a big deal. So I mean, I think that this is, if you can come back to us with some standard, this is what we suggest will solve the problem.
Well, it would be addressing the intent and purpose of Commissioner May's
Right.
direction, but also the other ordinance provisions that would have to change in chapter 14, chapter 7, and I think in chapter 2.
Because we may see all that and then go, wait a minute, we don't want to live this 60 day because we've seen all this other stuff.
If you want to withdraw the motion and go for that,
or you guys can just vote the motion down, but I think we should vote.
okay, let's vote then.
Yeah.
All in-
I'm saying, then we can't go to workshop. If we vote.
Three.
If we vote and it passes, there won't be a workshop, there won't be any more information.
If it passes.
Still can.
And if it doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
Seems like we should
Yes.
take Williams.
All right, so I'll rescind my motion, and we'll go to workshop, we'll talk about it. Pardon me?
Thank you, we know that.
We know we can't vote at a
We're
workshop,
well
but we
aware of
can
that.
get all of the ideas
We can
back.
get it up
But why
to a
can't we have
place
another
where we-
special meeting? Why does it have to be a workshop? Why can't it be a special meeting where we can vote then, once we get more?
Because what I'm gonna bring you is cannot be voted on officially until it goes to the LPA process.
Okay.
And we actually advertise and schedule public hearings. When I'm trying to get some clarity, so we don't have complete chaos.
Right.
After it's gone through 2 public hearings and it gets to you for 2 more, and then we ended up with a blankety blank show because we're not on the same page.
Okay.
I do like the special meeting instead of a workshop, so we can hear from the public.
That's fine.
Can we do that?
Can I just suggest something because it does very,
minutes.
it does, I can do that. It does very much seem like kicking down the can down the road. I think what I would maybe suggest is a cleaner motion that says we start the enforcement process. Because like you pointed out, there's time and there's things you need to do now if we want that to start happening in January. I think maintaining the rule that we have, starting enforcement process or not, you can vote that down as well. While still maintaining, because we're talking about 2 things, the LDRs as they are now, bless you, William. The LDRs we have now, and then also, which we really can't touch, if we touch them, they go away. Well, and then coming back with seeing what else we can potentially do. I feel like those are 2 things
No, because
that
then
we
we're
can
giving
consider.
directions to do 2 opposite things.
Well, not necessarily because LDR, like our land use code can address multitudes of things, as explained earlier.
Somebody make a motion.
I move we take Williams' suggestion of bringing it back, and I'm agnostic whether it's a special meeting or a workshop.
I second, and I ask that it's a special meeting, so we have public input.
And we can all have a chance before that special meeting to meet with our staff and to get a full understanding of it, what they're talking about before we go to special meeting, so it doesn't become a workshop. So that was a motion and a second as a special meeting.
Aye.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye. Aye.
No, no opposed. All right, so, it does.
And just to be clear, I think a top question from the community is enforcement gonna start after this meeting? Because we've had so many meetings discussing this issue. And
Because we're not.
I know, we're gonna be clear that it's not starting. We're having more meetings.
Mr. Brown has his light on. He's been very.
I've been silent.
You have been sorry.
Question. William, this is also for you. Obviously, we're gonna have another special meeting on this topic. What is your time frame and when you would like to see this
Next
brought
week.
back?
Friday.
And William, is there anything as far as preparing for this meeting, a certain time frame you would need in order to be able to bring this back to the commission?
I don't foresee us being able to have a special meeting until the earliest will be November. We have all this other stuff that's floating around.
It would not be in October. It would have to be in November.
There's no way, we're almost in October. October starts next week.
I know. That's why I said it wouldn't be until November.
November or December, probably.
So the question would be, do we want to bring this in, because we are typically, I'm not sure with the clerk, did we cancel that second meeting in November?
November 15th?
It was before, I think, the week before
November 5th we
Thanksgiving.
did.
I know we canceled.
Oh, that's right.
So
It's November 19th, city manager.
19. Do we
Well, we can go to December.
want to put this in December, or do we want to wait until after the holidays? I'm just I want to make sure if we schedule this, that we're doing it realistically when you guys would like to bring this back.
Right. We have a commission meeting on the 3rd of December, we have a commission meeting on the 17th.
What,
of December.
I'm just, hold on, if we're scheduling, if we've canceled the 5th, but we are having the 19th, the 11th, is that right, or the 12th? The 12th of November is probably the only day I would recommend that we could attempt to make this year. Because if our goal is to hear from the public, we
Right.
don't want to have a special meeting in the middle of the holidays.
Right.
When they're all possibly not here, unless you guys want to do that, and then possibly the November the 12th.
It's
That's
We'll
CRA.
be on the CRA
CRA.
second meeting in.
Well, then I guess I'm
November.
SOL. It's gonna be probably January.
What about November 21st, which is a Thursday?
I thought we.
Isn't that Thanksgiving?
No, that's the
No,
week
that's
before.
the 28th.
Thanksgiving.
That could work possibly.
I'm having
I'm just
eye
looking
surgery.
I mean, we
I'll
care.
just go with a patch on my eye.
No, but based on the schedule we're looking at,
Yeah.
though. We would be looking at either November 21st or having this in January, because like William said,
Yeah.
we don't want to have this during the holidays when there might be people who are out of town.
So January 7th? January 7th?
So you do want to push this to January?
Well, I mean, we have, in December, we have,
And January 7th will be our first commission meeting of 2025.
Yeah.
So we couldn't have it on the 7th unless,
it wouldn't be a special meeting, it'd be part of our city, well, that, our city commission meeting is the 7th. We could have a special meeting on the 9th, on a Thursday. Okay. The 9th.
so Thursday, January 9th is good with everyone as far as bringing
I
this
gotta
back.
schedule a cruise.
Okay.
You're not going.
Need a cruise.
We're both gonna go.
Madam Clerk, did you get that?
I did, and I did a cursory look at the commission calendars and don't see anything on January 9th, but William, are you on vacation?
We were just kidding around, we were gonna make a vacation, make sure that Yolanda and I were not here. But we'll be
I
here.
was gonna have a headache today, but here I am. But you'll be around.
I don't plan to ever go anywhere.
I know, it's useless, it's useless to try. All right, so, January 9th, we're gonna come back, you're gonna educate us, you're gonna work on that, we're gonna get more input from the
I'm only
community.
gonna claim that we're gonna inform you. Education might be a stretch.
Oh.
I'm going to inform you on all the
Listen, I've taken
options.
a couple, it's about being older tonight, so Mr. Diaz, thank you very much.
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.